All right, let's go ahead and get started. This is a work session on the general government operating and capital budgets. We have a wonderful schedule. Thank you, Lance and team. So you can see the breaks that we have in there. Let's go ahead and do introductions, and then we'll get moving on our schedule.
Thanks, Alex.
Christopher Felix Graf.
Suzanne France.
Pete Peterson.
Austin Davidson.
Horace Dunbar.
Cameron Perez-Radia.
Fred Dyche.
Crystal Kennedy.
Lance Wilbur.
Okay, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Lance.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your time today. We have 4 hours ahead of us, a block, and as the chair mentioned, we, based on the timing that we've spent with departments in the past, we've made some adjustments. So we'll try to keep on schedule as much as we can. I've asked departments to show up 30 minutes ahead of time in the event that you are ahead of schedule, and so we'll move along. I think in some departments we've scheduled 5 and 10 minutes, and in the past we haven't taken any of that time. So our goal is to end by 3 o'clock today, and as I mentioned to the directors, if there are some departments, the ones at the end of our work session, if we don't get to them today, we'll pick them up first thing on the 25th, and then we'll finish general government before we go into utilities. So that's what's ahead of us today and next week. So with that in mind, I'll kind of run through the schedule for members of the assembly and members of the audience. Kind of broken this down. You're going to have 2 handouts today. I asked Desiree to just pass out the first one because sometimes it's hard to keep you guys without looking ahead. So when we take a break, you'll get the second half, and it's pretty much the same material. But we're going to start off with a little bit review and highlights of what I shared with you in the overview. I won't spend a whole lot of time on that, but there's some key information that I want to address there. We'll start off with public safety, and then the project management engineering, which is primarily the capital program, and then maintenance and operations. We'll take a break, and then we'll pick back up, and we'll go with start off with public transportation and go through the schedule. And we also have a break in there when we after we pick up at 1 o'clock. We'll take a break about an hour later. And again, as we get down to the CFO, finance, and purchasing, if for some reason we need extra time, we have enough time next week because I don't think it's going to take us the block of 4 hours to get through everyone. Particularly as I know that we have a special meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee, the Assembly's Budget and Finance Committee next week to talk about a couple of the items that may take some time today. So with that, let me just start off with, again, a summary of where we are in our proposed budget for 2019 or for 2020. What we have is we have an increase in the budget of about $12 million, which is about a 2% increase over last year. Position count is up, but and we will go through these individually. We have a significant increase in Parks and Recreation. We have some a small increase in the police department, and then we have some other increases in payroll. We'll talk about that. And Mr. Falsey mentioned that to you yesterday, and we'll talk at length about that today. As far as the property taxes, total property taxes in this proposed budget will go up by about $3.6 million. And for members of the Assembly and the audience, the way we calculate this is we look at all of the other revenues under the tax cap, and we find out how much money we're making in those areas, and then whatever the balance is, that is what we apply for property taxes, and for that amount it's $3.6 million. Estimated the cost of a home, an average price home of $350,000 is going to be around $20 per increase. Again, this is just for general government. Does not include anything related to the school district. So that number will get refined as we get into April when we set the mill rate and do first quarter adjustments. So in summary, again, the next couple slides are where our money comes from and where our money is going to. Again, the property tax side of the house, that $310 million includes the $19 million of service areas, including all of the hillside service areas in Chubiak and Eagle River. The other taxes, the orange, the taxes under the tax cap limit, that is things that related to the marijuana, fuel, MUSA, MISA, a little bit of money we get from PILT from the federal and the state, and then going around the corner. if members of the Assembly haven't had a chance to take a look at the revenue section inside your operating budget, in the overview section, there's a really good summary of where all of these resources are coming from, and I think that will aid. But if you have any questions on this, I'm not going to spend too much time. We talked about it last week. But that section really gives you a good summary, and then the revenue pages in the book give you a really good breakdown. Again, if you have any questions, just let us know.
Thank you. Just want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Weld.
And then where our resources are going, 56% of our resources are going to personnel, a little bit to supplies, and a significant amount of revenue, about 30%, goes to other services. And as I mentioned before, those are lease payments, contractual services, any obligations that we would have outside of labor. And then debt service, that is the debt service to our bonds. And then depreciation, most of the depreciation is in our technology. So when you look in the budget, you will see that most of the depreciation is identified in Susie Marshall's budget, and also a separate line item in the AM support. A reminder on how departments are broken down. This is an allocation in priority order by the amount of resources that the proposed budget has in direct costs, and then a percentage of the total budget by department. In this illustration, again, we've pulled out debt service and depreciation as a separate line items, because these are the numbers that you see here the departments are responsible for as it relates to their direct costs. Again, debt service, most of that $57 million, about 47 of that $57 million, you will see in operation and maintenance. You will see that their total budget is about $87 million, but their day-to-day operations is only about 40 of that. And we'll go through each one of these departments as we move along. To highlight some of the changes that we have, as I mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, the administration in this budget, we still maintain a high priority in public safety, so we have budgeted a full academy for the Anchorage Fire Department. We've been talking to the chief and the folks at the fire department. There's an anticipation that they may have a large retirement or significant amount of folks leaving, because they're on a schedule that 20 to 25 years ago they had a lot of folks, they had a large academy, so there may be some, there's going to be a need there to make sure that we're addressing that properly. Then APD, they're going to continue to have an attrition academy. Both of these are attrition academies. They are not growth academies in either one of those. We're proposing some positions, 6 positions in dispatch or evidence. I identified these in OMB as trail patrols. I think the chief can, when we get to the police department, they're not a special unit or something special, but they are individuals that the police department administration is going to be looking to apply their patrol officers to more attention to trails inside the Anchorage area.
Would you prefer questions after you're done with certain segments or throughout?
Your show, Mr. Chairman. I'll do it either way.
Or just on the academies, fire department's 1.2 million and APD is a quarter of that.
Yeah.
Why is it a huge difference?
We're going to talk about that. I think both the police chief and the fire chief we've had these conversations. I think you'll get some good descriptions of that. So hold the question on that one. Housing and homeless.
And actually one more. Mr. Constant?
So trail patrols, could you just kind of get a little bit into that line?
So one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that we add additional officers to the police department that would help in safety patrol or trail patrol. So, I mean, if
You want me to help you?
yeah.
So this is Justin Dahl with APD, for the record. So I know that there's a desire from the community that's being expressed through the assembly to see a stronger presence from APD and Parks and Trails. I think we're interested in that as well. The line item there, I think, is 4 additional sworn police officer positions with the intent that that's where they would go. The discussion we've been having all throughout this process is I totally support the idea that we're expressing the community's desire to see that at this point. I just always caution that the budget cycle at best is an annual process, and sometimes we need to be a little bit more flexible. So our intent is that we would put those people there, but obviously 4 more police officers. If there were some other emerging public safety issue that the attention, the focus shifted to something else, because they're sworn police officer positions, they could be reassigned to something else if we had something come up. So maintaining that kind of flexibility at the operational level, I think, is important.
Okay. So do you want specific questions on this when we talk public
Let's
safety?
wait till we get to the
Yeah.
police
Okay.
department, and then he has 20 minutes of your undivided attention.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief.
Sure.
The next group is a focus on housing and homelessness. At the Assembly's Homeless Committee, we talked about the title of this one, the Homeless and Behavioral Health Systems Coordinator, what that actual position would do, or if there's a different task that that position may undertake. We'll talk about that when we get to the Health Department. That $53,000 is funding that position for a half a year. The Mobile Intervention Team, we are working on some information from the Assembly's Homeless Committee about breaking that cost down for you. And so we are working on that one, but that will be $550,000. That would be between the Health Department and Anchorage Police Department to support the Mobile Intervention Team. $250,000 with the intention of supporting shelters. And then again, we have 14 individuals this year we're going to dedicate to Parks and Rec camp cleanup. And then individually on the bottom, property appraisal, about $800,000. Mr. Falsey and I have mentioned to you, as I think Mr. Slifka has, that $800,000 you'll see when we get to finance. It's 2 big pieces. About 550 of it is for the CAMA or the software, and about 275 of it is roughly for the 3 positions that we'll be hiring for that. We'll talk about the parts budget. We have over 1,000 vehicles in our general government fleet, including the APD, and the age of the fleet is getting out there, so they need some more, requesting some more money for parts. We talked about the loss of transit match from Mental Health Trust. We talked about the payroll auditors. This is to pay those individuals starting half year, because their initial focus is going to be on ML&P, and the resources to pay for those people in 19 and the beginning of 20 will be from the resources that we've identified to support all of the efforts in the ML&P transition. And then the Women in Infants and Children, a position there. And then we'll talk about these other ones as we get to individual departments.
Before you move on, I have a question from Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lance, maybe you said this at the beginning, and I started thinking about what Nolan brought up yesterday. So he said something about Nolan Clowder from the EAC, that it was a $2 million increase. I remember thinking, no, it was over 10, and so it's 11 or 12, correct?
Correct.
The overall budget. How much, when I look by department at the percentage increase or decrease for that department's budget, what is that 12 million or whatever it is generally represented an increase? What percentage, and what percentage is attributable to just cost of living or regular increase? So I want to be able to tell, is this department actually going up or down? Like, what's the baseline?
You will be able to tell that when we see the reconciliation sheets. You will be able to see how much individual departments are going up. But
Okay.
collectively, they're going up just in the labor and the non-labor. The labor and benefits about $6.6 million, and that will be broken out into for each one of those. These individuals are additions, so you'll see an additional $1.2 million.
What's the percent? I'm asking about the percent. Oh, no, looks like she wants to answer this. But
I can't give you, through the chair to Ms. Quinn Davidson, I can't give you a percentage on it. We can calculate that for you. But I would like to clarify that, and Lance, correct me if this is wrong, that these, to our ears, are not actually ads. They have been one-time budgeted items, and in a continuation budget process, they get kicked out when we roll everything over. So you see the mobile intervention team and the camp cleanup and the academies have been funded over the last 3 years as individual one-time line items. So while they're categorized here as an ad, it's really a continuation of the money that has been expended over the 3 years. And I think for the most part, OMB this year has put them into the operations category as opposed to the one-time spend category. So they will live in operations continuation rollover from here on out. So you will not see these as adds in 2020 when we are talking about the 2021 budget.
Can I follow? So this isn't actually responsive to the percentage question, but it's
Correct.
really interesting. So are those, how do we tell how much was spent last year? Because this makes it look like it's all additions, but it's
Correct.
not. So is there a chart that shows how much we spent on the MIT
We
last
can
year?
give you that.
Because I think
Yes.
that would be helpful for us to communicate
Yes.
to the constituents.
I agree, because when you draw across the fact that there was an APD academy and one or maybe two fire academies, depending on the rollover of year one, and the fact that the MIT existed last year, you had two? Okay. And the Parks and Rec positions were funded as single operating line item, but here they are at the same amount that they were funded at last year. They're just being put into the operating budget as opposed to a one-time cost. So we can draw those out and color code them so
That would
you
be
see
really
that that's
helpful.
operating and that was a one-time.
Just
and then
like
it's
how much
just
did we
carrying
spend in
over.
19, how much are we planning to spend in 20?
But I think for the most part, and Lance, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the bulk of the increase is attributable to cost of living and salary increases and medical increases, and most of the 12 bump is not actually additional things in the budget.
Well, and that's what I'm kind of wondering, like I look at assembly, for instance, and just on that page, and it's 7.73% of increased budget. How much of, if there's an overall increase of 3% of every budget just because that's cost of living or whatever, that's a 4-point-some% substantively. So since I don't know that number, I can't tell.
And we'll talk to Nolan too, because I think that Nolan may have done this already as part of his budget advisory commission process. So that's maybe where he's getting his number from. So we'll clarify that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure, Mr. Constance.
So what I just heard is that then these academies are now built into the budget going
They are.
That's great.
Yep.
Thank you. It's not going to be a fight every year.
The things that are not automatic will be an automatic number. Might be like, but the payroll auditors, we're going to do them until we're done. And then when we're done, we'll attrition them out because we don't need to keep them on. And we mentioned that before. So this was a long conversation, as Ms. Browse is mentioning. This was a long conversation between OMB and the administration to make that decision, to make those academies, instead of doing one time every year, just put them in as constant, and there will be continuation every year. The number may adjust based on the cost, but as far as the full philosophy, that's not what we just add them on as a regular roll every year. So we won't go through each one of these, but this is a position, we talked about the position changes, and when we get to the individual departments, we can talk about how those things are going to be, why a department may be changing or not. But this is a summary sheet for you. A review of the capital budget, as the chairman mentioned, when we get to a department, and we get to the fire department, we're going to talk about their operating budget, and then we're going to talk about their capital budget. Same thing with the library, maintenance and operations, and parks. So in summary, for the capital budget, for the capital improvement budget for 2020, the first column there are bonds, and we'll talk about individual projects. And one of the things that we did for you this year is we provided a map in the book. I think we did that last year. The other thing that was helpful for planning and zoning, and then I think you got copies of it today, is we have a short description of each one of these capital projects that's going to be linked to your map. So when the handout that you should have capital projects, and it'll say R1, that will be road number 1 as it relates to your map. So that will may be helpful in your discussions when you're figuring out individual road projects, or for any of them for that matter. So,
I'm sorry, Lance, where did you say the map was?
the map was in your capital book when we distributed your capital book. Should have been on the inside jacket. And if you don't have one or need another one, please let me know and I'll get you another one. Okay, so know that we would start late and end early. We're right on track. So we're going to start off with the police department. And so, Chief, if you want to come up here with me, that would be great. So the way that we're going to work through these is this sheet right here. If you open up the police department, you're going to see a lot of detail about what's going on in each individual department. This one page is a page that you will see in every department, and so it's a copy of the reconciliation page. And this may get to Assembly Member Davidson's question. But what you will see is at the top, and I explained it in some detail for the police because you'll see what's going on. When we approved the budget last year. We had an approved budget for the police department. But as a result of any revisions we might have made in 2019 in April, the police department's budget for 2019 was $118 million for all of 19, or all of 19 with 602 full-time positions. In the 2019 budget, they had some one-time costs identified. And when we have a one-time cost, if they are one-time, we take them out when we go to the next year. So for example, at $350,000 for an academy, it was a one-time cost. We took it out. They had a one-time hit of money for litigation. We took it out because those are one-time hits we roll. They do have some bond obligations, so we add that into the debt service amount. Tax anticipation notes, that's a calculation that's done through public finance, but the payment is inside the police department because that's where the bonds are held. Then we start with 2020. So we take a look at what's going on with 2020. We know that for the police department, the adjustments for salaries, benefits, when they roll into what they have right now and they roll into 2020, every department will be like this. If they have a bargaining unit that requires rate increases or they have step increases or adjustments, we calculate that for every single position inside the police department and every single position in the municipality of Anchorage. So we know if someone's going to get a rate increase in April or May or October, we put that into their budget so they have the budget to maintain those the labor requirements. So for the police department, that's a $1.7 million increase in the labor for the police department. We are making some changes as to how the fleet is going to be built in for the police department. In the past, what was going on is the police department would contribute to a fleet fund out of their operating budget to buy police cars. What we're going to propose this year is in the maintenance and operations, we're proposing to bond for $2.4 million for 65 police vehicles, because while we've been adding police officers, we have not been adding to the fleet. And so there is a need for that at the police side, and when we get to maintenance and operations, who manages the fleet, we'll recognize. So that will be a reduction in their operating side as it relates to the fleet. Police and fire retirement, we get the cost from police and fire retirement, whatever that obligation is, we add it. And then one of the other things that we did this year is that we know that in the police department, they have a DUI and evidence towing contract, they have an abandoned junk vehicles contract, and they have an ammunition cost. In the past, we would have challenged the department to basically say, those are going to be one-time things, you're going to have to suck it up. This year, the administration basically said that's not reasonable. That's not, they are going to be towing vehicles. They are going to be removing abandoned junk vehicles. They do a lot of that support with development services. So we put that in their continuation budget as a need for the police department. So we added that in. So those were just a continuation to go forward. Then what we do is we add the things above continuation for the police department. And for them, we added an academy. And this will be an annual cost from this year forward, or at least in this administration. We know, and we've talked about the need over the last 3 or 4 years for the need to add some resources to the dispatch or some non-sworns inside the police department. So that is added to the budget. Those will be continuing costs into the future. And then the other thing, we talked about the new patrol officers for trail safety. The chief just mentioned those. And then while it's inside the Girdwood service area, it's in the police budget. The Whittier Police contract, the amount of money that will be required for that is $36,000. But the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, it comes out of that service area. But it's in their budget, so we have to show that increase in their budget. So in total, with the adjustments that the chief had mentioned, what happened in 19 and what they plan to do in 2020, our proposed budget would increase them basically by about $3 million to $121 million. So the police department, while we are going to be doing recommending a buy for vehicles, it's operationally going to show up in maintenance and operations. When we get to a point if the assembly agrees to that and we do a bond it will be in a police bond because it will be in the police service area. So when we get to that point, we will break that down for you. But that's all I have on the police department, and there's lots of things I'm sure that I could add here, or the chief can add. But if you have any questions of me or the chief.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm trying to figure out if this bonding for fleet is a major change or just a relatively minor shift. So you say we're increasing the budget of the police department by $3 million, but is another way to say that we're actually increasing it by about $4.2 million because you're taking that $1.2 million and you're shifting it to somewhere else, so they're going to have more funds.
We took it. We took it out of the police department because they will not use those resources for fleet adjustment.
Oh, I see. So yeah, so it's not going to show up in the budget because it's been taken out there too. Right. Is this something we plan to do going forward, or is this a one-time thing for this year?
I would suggest that it's not a one-time thing because we have not been keeping up with them, and I don't think it's a forever thing, but the police department and streets can tell you this. We ought to be on a rotation schedule. They have, I don't know, 400 plus vehicles in their fleet. We should be replacing at least 10% of those every single year. I mean, we should be at least every 7 years, we should be on a replacement cycle, and we're not. Right now, we contribute about $2.3 million, and we spend pretty much all of the fleet money that we have in all of general government, primarily on APD. So we need to be able to catch up there, and we need to be able to keep up with general government. So, to answer your question, I don't think it's a one-time thing until we get the fleet back up to a rate in which they ought to be on a replacement cycle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, got a list of questions here. Mr. Constantine.
Thank you. Two questions. The contractual increase for junk and abandoned vehicles, who is that contract with? Is it a third party, or is it kind of contractual to another department?
No, it's with through the chair. It's a contract with a local vendor, and I think I guess the way I would describe it is not so much of an increase as a realistic budgeting of what the actual cost is. It's been under budgeted for years, and then we just have to make it up someplace. So this is reflecting what the contract's actually going to be.
That's important nuance. I will concede that I'm a very big user of this project, this budget line. So I want to make sure it's accurate and we're doing it right. So thank you for that clarification that it's just accurately reflecting what we're actually spending. And then the question of the patrol officers for trail safety, I'm very supportive of this idea with two caveats. You know, I heard you express that they may end up doing other duties as assigned. My neighbors have been clamoring for some kind of enforcement, whether it's sworn officers or a land use enforcement officer whose focus is in the parks, public lands. And so I'm hopeful that we are able to keep that tight. I'll be supportive, of course. My question really on the capital side of this, are we planning to buy either snow machines or four-wheelers, some kind of vehicle for actually getting up and down the trails? So we have 300 plus miles of transportation pathways for people that are basically on patrol.
So we do have some vehicles like that already. The police department actually has some snow machines. We don't do regular patrols with them typically. They're things that we use more on the lines of if we have someone who's missing in one of our less urban areas, we use them for that kind of stuff, or crime scenes, those kinds of things. If and when we get to a point when we have that regular patrol presence in the park and trail system around town, I think it'll be a combination of motorized and unmotorized vehicles. We've had lots and lots of interest to the point of local civic groups donating all-weather fat tire bikes to the police department. So I think there's that interest in seeing officers on non-motorized vehicles as well. So in my mind, it would be a combination of the two, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I have seen at one point a vehicle down there that looked to be APD, and I got comments from neighbors for a week afterwards. It's a very effective tool for communicating the presence of some sense of lawfulness in a generally unlawful place. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my comments are also about I've been calling them park rangers for years. I've been advocating for that. I'm glad to see it in the budget this year. My question is, and you may not already know this, but so are you planning to use them two-man teams, or are you going to be traveling individually, or?
I think most likely that's something that we would do in pairs, just because of the types of things that we expect or that we know just from our experience that they'll probably run into. Just operationally, that's probably the most effective way to do it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Presbyterian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want to dig a little bit more into the trail patrol. I heard you speak earlier about the justification from your perspective was that the public was looking for something there. And I don't quite know where we're getting that information in terms of data to sort of justify a budget item saying, you know, is there increased crime there? Is there really sort of solid information that says if we're going to invest this amount of money, that's where we should be investing it, that's actually going to help to minimize crime, to make our city safer, as opposed to we're hearing a lot of from the public, and that's why we're doing it. And I guess I also wanted to just tag on to Mr. Constant, generally an unlawful place. And so I had heard earlier in the year that actually the number of reported crimes on the trails was not significant, and that we didn't see that as being necessarily an unlawful place where we're seeing a lot of crime happen. We're certainly from getting some reports of activity there, but I guess I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the justification for that being where we're going to invest, as opposed to other areas of our city that are experiencing potentially a higher need.
Okay, I'm not sure if I understand your question entirely.
Well, let me just say it really plainly. You said we're going to put 4 officers on the trails because that's what the public wants, right? That's not a strong. I mean, I think that's good. I don't know where did we do a survey? Is it from the news? Where are we getting information that that's what the public wants? That's the first question, I guess. And the second question is, what is the basis for this investment? Is it that there's increased crime there? Is it that there's a?
Can I answer your first one first before we get so far down that I can't remember the basic first part? So, I mean, honestly, I think a lot of that feedback is coming through the elected members that are sitting at the table nodding their heads. I'm getting that information through the assembly that, hey, this is something we feel is important. We're hearing from our constituents. This is what they're asking for. Now, to the extent that the police department is data-driven, we are working really hard in that direction. There are a whole lot of things that we're doing. I could spend all day today and all day tomorrow talking about that. But Lance says I can't do that. And so I won't. But I agree that the things that we do should be data-driven. However, I think that it would be it really would not be realistic for me as the leader of that agency to disregard the feedback that we get from the public and the things that they want to see the police department doing. And for the last couple of years, it's been presence all over the city, right? And we've dedicated a lot of effort to making the patrol division bigger so people feel that presence, because I can talk about data all day long, but that doesn't always change the way people feel about their neighborhood or the trail that they like to frequent or the park that they like to frequent. What changes that feeling typically is visible uniformed law enforcement. So I don't really have a huge raft of data to support that, but I do have lots and lots of feedback. Some of it's direct to the police department. A lot of it is, frankly, through this body saying we would feel safer if we saw uniformed law enforcement in this area on a regular basis. And so we're just trying to be responsive to the community's desires.
Great. So question 2, is there significant crime on trails? Has there been increased crime compared to other areas of the city?
I don't think that I have any data that shows that there is a big spike in crime in the trail system.
All right. Thanks.
I have you on the list, Mr. Mason. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few short questions. The first one for Mr. Wilbur on the vehicles. Will we see then the debt service showing up on in the police
Yes.
budget then next year? Okay. And,
No, the debt will show up for two times. One, if the bond passes, and two, after we buy the vehicles.
okay, thank you. And then, on the trail officers, and I understand Chief Dahl, they would be deployed to the areas of greatest need. Is there any chance that they would also be used as SROs in the winter?
I don't know that that's something that we had considered. I will tell you, and I know I kind of mentioned this before, and I'll say it again. I'm a little reluctant to have an operational aspect of the police department get pinned down through some kind of legislation, because even though that might seem like a good idea today, and that we even agree that that's where we want to put that resource, because this process unfolds on a once-a-year basis, I want to make sure that we have the flexibility to address those community concerns that come up that maybe it changes our priority for whatever reason. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but I think generally to get to a more year-round and not just during the summertime type of feeling in the park systems, we probably wouldn't use them in a dual role like that.
And then, thank you. The other question has to do with the timing of academies, since those are attrition academies. Do you only take in then as many officers as you think are going to be leaving then in a given year? Okay.
So, yes. So what we've been doing the last few years is having an academy that starts in June and one that starts in December. And at least for 2019, we didn't add any new positions to the police department. So those academies, the size of those academies is based on however many positions that we have vacant at the time the academy starts. And frankly, if I can project at all what the vacancies are going to be, because it's a long cycle, right? Only twice a year. So and plus I also know that if I hire 30 people for an academy, maybe at the end 25 graduate. So we try to factor that in a little bit and be as realistic as we can. What I'm always striving to do with our hiring cycle is to even it out, so we don't have these kind of boom and bust periods because the training cycle is so long. So that's the intent behind doing academies 2 times a year. And I know that the budget line says 1 academy, but really that's an attempt to cover both of those, the 2 different start dates, basically.
And then my last question is just one of curiosity. Ammunition cost, that just goes up that much each year?
Yeah, we have no control over that, and sometimes there are things that happen in the world that make that go up unexpectedly, more than just sort of a normal, kind of cost of living increase. So we try to adjust and stay abreast of that, but sometimes it goes up a lot more than we anticipated.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Dice.
Yeah, thank you. As often happens at this table, Mr. Perez Verdilla has asked a key question. And we should not be doing government based on the squeaky wheel. And I have a lot of confidence in the police department, the mayor's sense of where is the best place to use your resources. And so don't feel any pressure from me. And I would hope that we don't put any pressure on you that keeps you from making the best strategic, practical decisions for public safety. And I feel strongly about that. And also, I am delighted to see in this budget the thing that you and I talked about administrative staff and dispatch and so on and so forth. And I hope you can say we're getting closer to where we need to be. Last thing is my pet project. I don't see any money in here for somebody in the crime lab working on the biological DNA samples. Have I missed it?
So I'll answer those in reverse order. I think that position you're talking about is part of the continuation budget because it was added in first quarter budget revision. So it's in there. You just can't see it because it doesn't look like an ad. It's already there.
But nobody's been hired, have they?
Well, we're working on it. It's very challenging because it's a very technical position that requires the person to have a lot of specific skills in order to meet all of the requirements to work in the lab and not somehow cause a problem with the state lab certification. But yes, we're working on it is the short answer. Your second question was, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I can't remember the second one. I know the first one was resource allocation, And we are talking about that's the intent for this, and that's why I have explained a couple times that we could be flexible there. What I will tell you, and probably for those of you that know me at all, I would never hesitate to realign the police department in any way that I thought needed to happen in order to get the best possible service for Anchorage.
Yeah, so.
And I forgot your second one.
Yeah, I'm frustrated that we haven't got the lab guy there.
Oh, non-sworn staff.
Yeah,
So, yes, this will definitely help. With the
Yeah,
non-sworn
so I have an
staff.
amendment for $130K to put in there for a year. It's taken out of the mayor's office.
Oh, for the
But I
lab
thought it was
position.
appreciated decrement.
Yeah. Well, the lab position is in there, and
Okay,
that's
that's what I wanted
funded-
to know.
It's a funded PCN that I am trying as hard as I possibly can to fill.
All right. Thank you. You don't have to do my amendment. Probably.
Don't give us heart attacks, Brad. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. This is really just a kind of a general question or open-ended, but I would, in looking at the police retirement and the academy, I've heard that about 30% of the officers right now have been in the force for less than 5 years or less, and typically we've had this group of potential retirees too, that there's always about a third of the force that's like could retire at any given moment, or what kind of a breakdown do you have right now within the staffing of the department?
That's a super interesting question. So this is something that I worry about a lot, actually, is that we do have a very young department right now in some ways. We think about 35% is 5 years or less. And when you talk about the number of officers that could potentially retire at any moment, that percentage is really high. It's somewhere probably between 25 and 30% of people that are in PERS and in the pension, like Tier 3 or Tier 2 of PERS, and have more than 20 years of service, so they're eligible to draw a pension upon retirement. That number's pretty big. So, I worry about that. We do lots of things inside the police department with an eye towards retention. Frankly, we sometimes see people in the 5 to 10 year range that are leaving APD and seeking opportunity elsewhere, and those people are very concerning to me if they leave. So, that's definitely something that we need to be thinking about, and I know that we are thinking about inside of APD to make sure that if we start to see our normal attrition spike up, that we do what we can to manage that.
Okay, and so if I can just follow up a little bit on that. So then in kind of looking forward, maybe not with this year's budget, but how do you see that impacting the need for future academies, or how that impacts the retirement fund?
So and Mr. Wilbur can probably speak better to the retirement funding, because that's police and fire, and that is most people that are already retired, not
those that will be retired.
Right. Yeah, we don't have too many people left that are in police and fire. There are a few, but not many. With regards to future years in academies, if we really did see an increase in the departure rate, and if you think back to like the mid to late 90s, frankly, when I was hired in 1996, we started this big ramp up of hiring. We had lots of academies, and in 1997 we had 3 academies. And so we're getting to the point where those people are, approaching that period. And we're, like I said, we want to retain them. They have lots of knowledge and skills. But we could get to a point where we're having to run more than 2 academies a year just to keep up and not start to lose ground. And so what we talk about inside APD with the training center staff is, how do we do that? How do we run more than 2 academies a year? Do we run 4 academies where we have 2 that maybe start kind of at the same time, within a week or 2, and they're almost parallel? Sort of operational considerations for that. But if we got to that point, what you would see us probably asking for in that budget year is for that academy line item to be greater, because that's kind of the startup cost for the academy, all the stuff they need to kind of get going, things that we buy when we hire somebody, equipment, stuff like that. So, yeah.
Okay, something to watch. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Dunley. Okay. Apologies. Ms. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. What is the uniform presence on the trail right now, to the extent that there could be any?
It's probably pretty minimal right now because that tends to be school resource officers during the summer, and for the most part, they've gone back to their schools. The community policing team still does spend time on the trails throughout the year, so they're there, but they have lots of other duties as well, so it's something that's a little bit more sporadic. Sometimes it's as a response to reports of illegal camping in an area or other criminal activity that's been reported to the police department. They tend to be sort of a jack of all trades type of unit. So the presence is sporadic and limited at this point.
Similarly, the CAP team, when it's not providing notice of camps, do they provide any off-season trail presence?
Again, just kind of through the course of their other duties, not necessarily specifically directed at trail patrol. I think probably the CAP team is most visible to people when they're doing the posting and mitigation of illegal camping, but they actually do a lot of other stuff too.
Okay.
That just isn't as visible. So they tend to get, when they're not doing that, they're doing the other things.
And last question is, it shows 4 new officers. Would that need to wait until after we had an academy, so you could add 4 officers, or is it contemplated that this would be a reassignment and then a replenishment, or?
Yeah, typically more of the reassignment replenishment type of setup. So anybody that gets hired at APD as a police officer goes to the police academy, and then they go to patrol, and that's where they start. And so it would probably look initially as added positions they all get added to the police academy first, and then we move them all around as things develop. How we would probably view that is, at some point when we felt like we could sustain it sooner rather than later, would be my preference, is that we would move some positions around to establish that kind of presence, and then ultimately the new bodies that get added, technically the PCNs become funded in January when the budget starts, and then they would start that filter, kind of that trickle down process.
And then the last thing is, what's the et cetera there on that line? That's really broad. Et cetera.
It says new patrol officers for trail limit, et cetera. I mean, when we were working with them, the actual duties of these could be any of the things that the chief talked about.
Okay, I just wanted a little clarification. Seems really broad.
Nope, there would be
I mean,
no more et
to be perfectly honest, sometimes the duties of police officers are very broad.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to try to get to this a little bit more because I'm troubled by it, and so maybe we could back up just for a second. And there was a narrative that I have been hearing as I've come on the assembly, that there was a time in our city's history where our police force was reduced below what we should have, and that we've been building it back, right? And so, knowing that we don't have all the data we need and all of the metrics that we need, how do we figure out how many we need? I mean, what are the things that you use to determine what the need is, so that we have a basis in some way to make a decision on whether there's a need or not? So that's my first question.
Great, that's a great question. So determining the size of the police department is really challenging. And really there's going to be a long answer and a short answer. I'll give you the short answer first, but I'm going to fill in a little bit. The short answer is, it depends on what the community wants. And each community is going to be a little different. The longer answer is, you look at the emerging crime trends in your community, you look at the geographical size of your community, you look at the things that your community is asking you to do, and then you benchmark off other agencies around the country to see what are they doing, how big are they, what kind of things are they accomplishing. So, for example, I just recently, as part of the public safety partnership with the U.S. Department of Justice, was in Memphis, and talking to the chief from Memphis. The population of Memphis is about 2 times the population of Anchorage. They're about 700,000 people, maybe a little less than that. And of course, geographically, they're much, much smaller. They feel like they're understaffed right now because they're only 2,200 police officers, and they should be about 2,500. That's where they feel comfortable. So that's interesting, since we're about 440 right now. That would make us closer to 1,000 probably. If you look at Tulsa, which is a city that's just a little bit bigger than Anchorage, They're about just a little under 400,000, I think, right around 400,000. They have a little over 800 sworn. So if you start, and I could go on with some other examples, but you kind of get the gist of it. If you start looking at other cities and sort of benchmarking cities that are similar to us or maybe bigger, but then you do kind of a per capita type ratio, what you see over and over again is APD is much smaller than most other places and most other cities our size. But I recognize, as a longtime resident of Anchorage and a longtime member of government here, that the checkbook is not infinite, right? So we have to determine as a community what's the right size for the police department. And that discussion, I think, should be a community discussion. I don't think, just the police chief should say, well, it's this number or whatever. What I can tell you is, if we set it at a certain number, I can tell you what we can do with that. I know a lot about police operations and what it takes to get jobs done. But I think when it comes to the size of how big should the police department be, that's a community-wide discussion. How do we feel about our neighborhoods? How do we feel about our public spaces? Do they feel safe? Is the police department doing the things that we want to do? If there are more things that we want the police department to do, then that's when we engage in that conversation and say, well, if you want us to do this, this is what we think it would take to get that done, those kinds of things. So I don't think it's just a canned answer. I think it's a very dynamic number, and it really depends on what the community wants.
So let me just ask you the second question. Do you think, based on your experience and the research that you've done, that we need 4 additional officers in Anchorage?
I think that if you gave me a couple hundred more police officers, there are lots of things that we could do.
Okay, because I believe that, and I think we need more officers as well.
Yep.
The challenge I'm having with this is when the narrative is a couple or 3 or 4 assembly members said that their constituents are concerned about the trails, so we're going to spend $500,000 to respond to them to put officers on trails when we have parts of our city that are experiencing crime, and we have people in their homes that want more officers, and we have people in their businesses that want more officers. And I'd rather have the narrative that the police department, in all their experience, feels very strongly that this city needs more officers in order to address crime throughout the city, and that they're going to deploy them in the places where they're most needed. And I'm all over that. I can support that forever. But the narrative of, because we've had some people complain about trails or concerns, that we're going to spend $500,000 on that, that's harder for me. And I know it's more of a narrative, because I realize what you said is that, yeah, they're trail officers, but we're going to put them where they're needed. And we're going to pull them off and put them where they're needed. And so from a public perspective, if I go to my community councils and talk with them, and they say, well, how can the trails get the officers? What about our neighborhoods? What about our stores? What about our, that sort of thing? And so I would just prefer in the future that the police force comes forward and says, we need more officers, and here's why, and here's the reasons why, and I would love to approve that. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So just a few comments. I have myself in the queue. So first, we're already falling behind schedule. So if we could just try to ask questions regarding the budget, and we're going to have plenty of opportunity to debate budget things later. This isn't the
time
forum for budget debate, I would say. This is sort of information gathering from the budget departments. And then second, just to remind folks about the process that we took. During our sort of goals and visioning sessions and the different 3 meetings that we had on that, we came up with a variety of different ideas. And one of the things that was suggested by the body was for us to come up with a list of budget suggestions and policy suggestions to the administration in advance of them coming up with the budget. And that was something that we debated publicly as a body, and we came up with, I met with all of the co-chairs, we came up with this list, sent this list to the administration, and then we continued to look at that list. So obviously this was our first time doing it, so there may have been some things that we can correct and do better next time. But that's where you see this as on here, the new patrol officers for trail safety. And there might be a few other items where you see that as well, where we gave the list to the administration and the administration decided, based on our guidance, what they wanted to do with it. So that was definitely a process that we took as a body. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wells.
Okay, thank you. short ones, and then we'll beat on the trail guys again. But one is, if you put these vehicles out to bond, and you say the police service area will pay, we've got the 2 service areas now with the highway service area. How does that work? And if that's complicated, just email it later.
Yep,
but it is,
yep.
it's a weird thing now. And then the MIT 550,000, that was in the 19 budget. It's not really new. Is that correct?
It was correct. It was identified as a one-time piece, and in this budget here, as we showed, we're showing the mobile intervention team as a budget item in 2020.
Okay. In this Girdwood, what is it? 36,000 for? I mean, that's not what they pay Whittier. Whittier's 10 times that.
It must be contractual increase.
It is.
It is.
It is.
Oh, that's the increase.
Yes.
Oh, I got you.
Program
Okay.
increase probably
Yes.
for their contract.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And then just for Cameron, send him that perf study, because that's educational, and I think it was only a couple of years old. Is that right? You had another one?
The staffing study?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really useful if you haven't seen it.
Okay.
It goes through all the departments. Anyway, so the trail positions, and I understand a lot of people just feel more comfortable, and that's really good because we get more people out there. I think it's a benefit. But what we hear from our constituents is arrest them for camping, it's illegal. Arrest them for pooping, it's illegal. Arrest them for littering, it's illegal. Are you going to arrest them for those things? That's what we're hearing from our
You
constituents.
can't arrest people for most of those things. You can ticket them.
And I understand that, but people want you to arrest them. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Change the Constitution.
Yeah.
Mr. Constant.
Thanks. You know, I had a constituent email me there's some real trouble in their neighborhood, and they emailed me, why can't the police just take him away? And I had to respond back, you don't want a police that can just take someone away.
I get it.
And so it has to be due process and the rules of law. So, Chief, I'm going to ask this in the form of questions to make sure the chair doesn't get mad at me. Right, we have like roughly 300 miles of trail, right?
I actually don't know, but
Okay,
that sounds
well,
about right.
I would assert that we do.
That wasn't a question.
Mr. Welton is fond of saying that our trails are no longer simply bike paths or recreational facilities, but they're actual commuter routes for people, right? They're pathways for people to get to work from home, get to home from work. You see that kind of use on the trail, right?
Yep.
So generally speaking, these are like our roadways. Now, if you were to stretch a 300-mile path north and south of Anchorage, up the Glen and out to Seward, that would go almost to Soldotna and to probably Talkeetna and beyond, right? Can you imagine having an unpatrolled stretch of highway that long and what it would look like?
Yeah, it kind of looks like turning an arm without any police officers on it.
It's not a scenario you want to have. You want to have active policing out there for basic public safety for a number of reasons, right? So to me, that's the rationale we'll be discussing more so even than any specific policing need. Is this a general principle? Thank you.
Thank you for those non-debate questions, I guess. All right. And I think that's it on my cue. So thank you so much.
Thanks, sir. All right, that's door number 1. Let's move on to the fire department.
Yeah. Go ahead and just grab it.
Nope. Happy to be here.
Okay. All right, here we go. Fire department. So similarly, with the fire department, we started with their 2019 budget at revised with about $101 million and roughly 400 full-time individuals. In 2019, we had a one-time cost of an academy for about $300,000. We know that through 2019, they spent about another $700 in addition to that to support the academies that they had, the total cost that they have, and we made some adjustments accordingly. The fire department has had bonds in the past, so the debt related to that and the tax anticipation notes related to their bonds, again, that's in the public finance world. The salaries and benefits adjustments for the police department, what this is recognizing is, for the fire department, recognizing that adjustments that they would have for their personnel for step increases and wages increases. The fire department's current contract is up in June, June 30th or as July 1 of 2020. We made no assumptions for the IAFF members for all of 2020. So these rate increases are the salaries and regular adjustments that they would have with their personnel. And then for their non-labor, we made some adjustments there. And then again, their contributions to police and fire retirement, again, for those individuals, I think the chief can correct me if I'm wrong, who are not in the fire department anymore. And then recognizing the conversations that we've been having about the need to fully fund an academy for 2020. And the chief can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she's also in a situation, and maybe even more, and I won't, certain is not the right number, but I think they are in a situation where, like 20 years ago, they did have a significant amount of people. So the likelihood of having more people leave through an attrition and having an academy to manage those needs is there. So we've talked in the past that the fire department has a challenge in 2019 of doing the things that they can to manage the challenge that they have responsible for. We know that there are some things that are not in their control. We are helping them manage those. Some of those things we won't know until the end of 2019. We talked about this yesterday at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. We know that they're going to have a significant amount of leave cash in that they weren't originally budgeted for. We will have to make some adjustments at the end of the year for the fire department to give them resources to balance the budget when the year ends. But for 2020, what we've done is in this proposed budget, we've they had a continuation budget for their expenses with the exception of the academy, which we loaded in at $1.2 million. And the chief can talk, we had a conversation last day or two about why the cost of their academy is significantly more than it would be for police academy. It's just the amount of training, the amount of equipment that they need, and the amount of people that are involved in it is more on the fire side than on the APD side. But she can address those questions. But I think this is the continuation budget on the operating side. And before we go to capital, I think we'll stop with the operating, and then we can go to capital if somebody has questions.
Thank you. Ms. Salentel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if we're looking at an attrition academy, I would presume that the fire personnel leaving are paid more than the fire personnel coming on. Do we have any kind of way to account for that? I mean, we're trying to replace folks who'd be retiring or otherwise leaving. So I'm just trying to get a sense of that.
Yes and no. Yes, the newer people coming in will make less money. However, those are not the people that promote up. So as people leave the department, we have other people move into those positions that are paid similar amounts. So it ends up, we don't really get a lot of gains out of replacing those senior people, because we're not replacing a senior captain with a firefighter. We have another firefighter that promotes and moves up through the chain. So we're replacing it with someone who's a captain who's now a senior captain. So we don't get a big benefit from a significant change out in personnel when it comes to labor costs.
So you run primarily flat except for whatever the regular personnel increases are due to contract obligations?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Here's a quick point. We have, when we do bonding for equipment, a fire truck or whatever, we add, there's an increased M&O for maintenance and so on, right?
Only if we're adding to the fleet.
Only if we're
If
adding.
we're replacing an existing vehicle,
Then
then
you
we
don't do
would
it.
not.
And I just wonder, we have the situation where we understand all the implications, kind of the rolling equipment closures and so on. But in a sense, we do these bonds and say, but we are guaranteed that we will have staff to do it. I mean, do we need to increase that increment if we get a new piece of equipment then?
If we add a station or if we add a new apparatus to the entire, then we would, because there is an operation and maintenance for the vehicle. And if we're adding to the fleet to expand the service that would require more personnel, then the O&M would be incremental for both the personnel and for the cost of the vehicle.
So does that M&O, that dollar amount just kind of goes into the general fund, or is it attached to the fire department?
It's attached to the fire department.
Because that's the expectation is, we buy that piece of equipment, we guarantee it will be staffed, and clearly that's not carried through, for various issues, because we have some equipment that's now not being staffed. So anyway, maybe that might be more of a comment, but when we do those bonds, make sure we have the proper M&O, I guess, or the increase for that. But I'm going to flesh out this academy cost, because it was $300,000 last year. 1.2, and there were some components in here that you mentioned, I didn't quite grasp it.
So our academies cost us $1.2 million, and that
Which is
is for
300,000.
an academy of 25 to 30 people. We get a lot of savings. It's much more efficient if we do one academy because the cost of a base academy doesn't change. So adding individuals to that doesn't push the amount up. So an academy for 20 people costs pretty much the same as an academy for 30 people. What happened last year is in 2018, we received the first part of the funding for the academy, which covered the academy testing, but we weren't able to do the hire because we didn't even know if we were going to hire in 2019. And then we looked at our attrition and the fact that we came into the year 9 positions short because of the bodies that the PCNs that we got for the Medic 81 and 82, our BLS system. So we determined we had to do an academy. We had a request to the administration for the other $750,000 to hold the rest of the academy, and we did not get funding for that. But we chose to do an academy anyway because we had attrition and we were people short.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
That's why the number is different.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Yeah, just two questions. I guess I want to dig into that one a little bit more. So the academy cost $1.2 million. Is that what you have budgeted this year for the academy?
In 2019, no.
Yes.
But in 2020, yes.
In 2020, you do.
Yes.
Okay.
But not in 2019.
Okay. And the second question is previously when we were talking about the police, we had talked about the fact that you were moving one-time expenses into the budget so that it is part of the budget. Is that the same here? Is
Yes.
this a one-time expense that previously was a one-time expense
Right.
and now it's being moved into the budget, so we're planning on having an academy every year?
Correct.
Okay.
That's the direction from the administration. That's how we budgeted this year, and we plan to do it in 2021.
Okay. And last question is, how do you determine attrition, and so that you're making a logical decision in terms of the academy and filling spots? How do you do that work?
So the last 2 years, there's 2 factors that we look at. We look at retirement projections as far as who is eligible for retirement. Right now, 22% of our department is eligible for retirement.
Okay.
And that's today. As of next spring, that number bumps up by about another 10%, so it puts us about 32%. Because 20 and 25 years ago, we hired 30 to 35 people at a time in large academies, and those people are all hitting retirement benchmarks. So that's the first thing we do. The other thing, the last 2 years, we have sent out a survey. We ask the people on our department, when are you going to retire? And we are fortunate that our people are pretty open about that and tell us. So they give us a heads up. So in our survey for 2020, said that out of our 56-hour our response personnel, we anticipate at least 23. And since then, I've heard from 2 other people, so we expect 25 people to retire. So we need to replace them. And that will probably, at least the next 5 years, we anticipate we'll be at between 25 and 30 people leaving every year for the next 5.
Thanks. And last question: do you have a sense of how many people you need in order to do your job, and where you are at with that?
I do. To operate this department the way that we should for our population size, I need another 96 people. In the past, I've said 60, that we need 60, but I was not including, if we were meeting the national standard for 4-person staffing, that gives me that's an extra 36 people firefighters that we would need. That includes, because we're short in admin, we're short in prevention, we're short in mechanics, we're short investigator, just management staff for the whole entire organization, we're short. So yeah, in a perfect world, I need 96 more people.
And you base that off of other fire departments of cities of this size and those kinds of things?
And the work that we should be delivering to the community. One of the places where we fall short is we should have a unit for community risk reduction that teaches our community ways to be safer, to reduce our call volume. That should be our priority, is making sure our people are, prevention's worth a pound to cure.
Yep.
And that should be our focus. We can't get there because we are so short.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Oh, thank you. Good answers. Actually, I just first of all wanted to say that I appreciate the cute little chart that tells you what kind of equipment is at each station. And what that brings up to me, though, is the fact that when Station 1 closed down or took offline one of the engines, there was still another engine on duty. Is that correct? Because is that telling me that there are 2 actual engines assigned at Station 1?
That's correct.
On any given, okay.
There are 2 engines at Station 1, but what we took out of service was the truck company.
Okay, all righty. So that's different then. Okay. But again, that's a great chart just to show the kind of equipment and then certainly the specialties on each of the different departments. 2 other questions though. Paramedics, I mean, that's one of your big needs as well, correct? And that's having an impact on just whether or not you can stand up some of this equipment, is because we don't always have the actual qualified people to fill those seats in that particular kind of equipment. Is that correct? And paramedics is a big one of those?
That is somewhat correct. Yes, okay. It is. Our staffing is based on credentialed employees to be able to do certain types of work. Where we do use paramedics. We have 9 ALS ambulances, and they need a firefighter paramedic on each one of those. So that's at least 9 people a day. They have to have a 1-to-1 rotation, so we need another 9 people available every day for that rotation. So that's 18 paramedics minimum. That gets us to 54 firefighter paramedics we need on shift. We are at that doesn't allow for any of them to be off duty for sick leave or annual leave or anything along those lines. One of our difficulties, and this is a nationwide issue, but really hits us, is there are not a lot of paramedics out there. And so we have taken the tack that we will hire really good people, and we will, if we get some paramedics, that's great, but we have encouraged our internal staff to go to paramedic school. So right now we have 10 people in the process of becoming paramedics who will come back and serve the community. So that's a huge benefit to us, but we will continue to struggle with that. That 10 gets divided into thirds, so that's only 3 additional people for each shift. So yes, we are short of as many paramedics as we would need to provide the level of service that we would like to provide.
Okay, thank you. We need to do some more career day training in our high schools to let them know that there's some pretty needed career fields out there. One more question, and you had mentioned that there was one year when you didn't have an academy funded, but you held the academy anyway. I'm sure it cost something, so where did those funds come from?
That's why we're in the situation we are in.
Okay, got it.
It's 2019.
Okay,
yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this has been answered through Ms. Salato's questions, Ms. Kennedy, and Mr. Perez-Padilla, but the problem we're in right now, which has been really disruptive and people are really frustrated about, this budget is increased and changed to account for that and to not experience that same challenge next year.
No. Well, yes and no. I'll say yes and no.
And if not, why not?
So what our situation was last year without the academy funding and the fact that we came into the year 9 positions short, that 9 positions short cost us $1 million in overtime in January, February through May that we normally do not encounter. So that's $1 million of it, of overtime money that we had to spend. $750,000 short for an academy. We spent the money anyway, and then the other contributing factor, we had some cost to insurance, and our utility tariff was higher than we expected. But we used the overtime money that we had kind of projected to use for the rest of the year. Got used up this summer because a significant part of the burn ban, we had 4 extra people out every day on brush rigs to keep us safe. And we were aware that we were not going to hit budget this spring, and we have been trying this entire time to find other places to save. And until we got to October 1st, when wildfire danger was no longer there, and we had not come up with any other plan to find savings to reduce our use of overtime, got us to this point. And we have tried with the union's help and the mayor's office's help. We had no other trigger to pull.
And so just to follow up, so this year you are funding the academy though, so that will not theoretically happen again, that shortfall, but there might be other shortfalls?
So two benefits for 2020. 2020 we're going in flat, so we won't have any vacancies, firefighter vacancies that we'll have to cover. So our overtime burden at the beginning of the year should be much lower than it was this year because we'll have staffing. The academy is funded. It really depends. The fire department has never made our overtime budget. We don't feel that we are adequately funded to cover the amount of overtime necessary to maintain minimum staffing for the department. We have always used supplies and services money, or sometimes vacancy factor, sometimes other money to make that up, and we are not adequately, yes, so we could be in this exact same boat next year, depending on what happened. Not to the tune of $3 to $4 million, but probably $1 million short on overtime, because we're not funded for that.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. Austin asked my question, but I just want to reiterate that just a little bit. I don't think, you said you never made the budget. I think we have had some kind of supplemental overtime appropriation for fire every year up around the assembly. And I appreciate that you are willing to state publicly that you essentially, maybe have some disagreements about the level of funding you require. This is one of those times where I miss Amy Dubosky. Because while she wanted to cut every other department, it seemed like, she was fiercely defensive of the fire department, and she had some interesting ideas. Yeah, I wonder why.
Yeah.
No, but she talked about, for example, the AWU fees. And I guess this is less a question for you, maybe for the folks in the administration. Is that still a conversation that's ongoing, and where are we with that?
The answer is yes. So for those who weren't around for those conversations, one of the larger items in the fire department's non-labor budget is a check that they send to AWU, because the fire department and the taxpayers who are supporting the fire department are maintaining all the hydrants around town. There's a question about whether that should be borne by taxpayers in the fire service areas, or whether that's ratepayer expense. And that's a question that can be changed, and it's different in different communities. The process to change it is to do a cost of service study that AWU would have to complete, and then to submit a new rate schedule to the RCA. AWU has procured the cost of service study. It's not finished, but it's underway. We should have it in hand, I think, by the end of the year. And then when we submit a new proposed rate structure to the RCA, I think it's one of those really long timelines, like 450 days or something. So it is on the table. We remain very interested in it. It probably is a 2021 budget conversation rather than a 2020 conversation.
This is the last thing I'll note on that, talking about the additional expense of the fire department because of the unusually warm summer. I think we should, I've said this before, we should not think of this as the hottest summer in the last 25 years. We should think of this as the coldest summer in the next 25 years. So we should start building our budget appropriately.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Thank you. One of the things that startled me when I rejoined this August body was that the fire department responds to 3 times as many medical calls as they do fire. Mr. Falsey, I would suggest to do a better job of communicating. We don't put fire operating only, we put emergency, medical, and fire. The capital cost for equipment is certainly higher for fire, but the fact that we're spending 3 times as much it clouds the real meaning of this budget. And that would help us all to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Ms. Allenson.
Thank you. So I understand that the budget isn't going to get us where we need to go to proposed budget even. And I know early in this administration there were kind of other cuts made to help police out and really build the police force. I mean, has there been that discussion about really shrinking a lot of areas to do what needs to be done to bring fire up to an adequate budget? The budget breakdown that was shared by Mr. Falsey recently had over 100%. It wasn't an overtime issue. It was over almost every category. So, I mean, why aren't we doing that?
So I'll jump in. I'll do my piece of paper. I think I've done that for them, Mayor.
I've had a piece of paper. I understand, but
so when primarily for the last 3 years, the administration has had one primary purpose, and that is importance of public safety. The first priority was to grow the police force. In order for us to do that within the resources that we had, We basically cut over, I think, 70 positions and $15 million from everybody else. We held the fire department harmless. We didn't take any money from them. So that is how that happens. And what this budget does is to try to bring that stabilization down, where we're stabilizing the fire department, the police department, and everyone else in line. But if we do within, I think as Chief Dahl mentioned, got to appreciate that we only have so much resources available. And like the chief has mentioned, there are needs that she would like to do. 27 departments that they have needs that they would like to do, things that they would. We are not able to accommodate those things, and so we have to prepare a budget that balances those priorities as best as we can based on the priorities of the community, priorities of the administration, and the resources that we have. So
Tax cap.
And those are the resources that we have. Or the tax cap provides us that limit that we have to do that. So if we wanted to make some adjustments in the fire department or the parks department or the planning department, we're going to have to we're going to have to squeeze the balloon from someone else to add it here, and there will be reductions in service in those places as well as increases in service in others. And when we prepare this balanced budget, we have a lot of conversations about what are the priorities, and we had almost $16 million worth of additional added requests from all of the departments. We were not able to accommodate, but probably like 3 or 4 million, and it's in police and fire, parks, and that's pretty much it.
Mr. Chair, when we got here, the police department was about 350 officers, and it was in an emergency situation. We've added 100 officers, and as Chief Dahl said, I would love to add another couple hundred more. That's what a community our size should have. The fire department's roughly 100 people short of where it should be. I would love to see us do that. But we're at the same time that we've had the pleasure of serving, the state assistance to us has declined significantly. The first year we were here, we saw municipal assistance decline by about $10 million, and then at the same time we lost the MLRP dividend, so we had to swallow the $17 million effective cut almost immediately. Almost every department in the municipality, aside from police and fire, has absorbed the cost of inflation over the last several years, and the cumulative effect of that is significant. And we would love to have a more robust relationship with the state, but that hasn't happened. And so, much as I would love to see us add more, and we have done everything we can to support the fire department, we have at the same time had to deal with the realities of where we are.
Thank you. Mr. Presbyterian.
I'm going to try to put this in the form of a question. Why there are fire departments and police departments have been around forever, right? All over the country. Why don't we have as the first line on our, this is what we need. This is how many officers, this is what we need. This is where we're at, right? And so that these are some of the things that we're using to determine what we need. The challenge I'm having in this process is that when someone says, yeah, we could use 100, 200, I mean, it feels to me as much like we're more, as opposed to no, we really thought through this. We know our population, we know our challenges, we know these things, and here's what we need. Now, we realize that there's constraints and there's budgets and there's the state, but that's what I'm challenged by is a justification to make a decision. So I would just say both for police and fire, that's what I'm challenged by is knowing data is hard, knowing that we're dealing with human beings, but that's the challenge I'm having. So I'm just wondering why we don't have some of that information as a basis for how many we need and why we need more.
Well, because part of the responsibility a legislative body has is to set the policy. And part of the responsibility the legislative body has is to do the research in order to determine what that policy is going to be. And different legislative bodies and different election cycles will make different decisions. And so I have strong opinions about what the size of the police department should be, what the size of the fire department should be. We have the constraints of the tax cap and some of the other economic conditions that affect us. But if you all think that you want a bigger police department, you need to say so. If you think you should have a bigger fire department, you need to say so. There is plenty of research out there, and we will be more than forthcoming about answering any questions you have. But within the constraints of what we have presented a budget, and this is a budgetary document.
Sure.
The policies behind it, we are happy to discuss and elaborate on it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we've been discussing possible increase in some of the fees. Is an increase in fees assumed in this budget? Or
The fees, yeah, there's a small portion of the development services fees that are related to the fire department for inspection. And so those positions that are in the fire department that are related to inspection, those resources are there to help support those services, not particularly for that inspection service. So those fees are at. A significant portion of the fire department's budget is ambulance fees, and we've made some adjustments there. And we also recognize that, through the work of this chief and the other chiefs, and I mentioned this earlier, that there's an opportunity to bring some additional resources into the municipality and the fire department to support their services as well. And that is a pass-through from Medicaid. We've included that into the budget, and we're, a lot more certain this year than we were last year about the ability to receive that based on recent actions of the state. And so we anticipate all of those revenues coming in 2020. So that's helping their case as well.
Thank you. And one additional thing I was going to say is, the fastest growing demographic in age-wise in Anchorage is those over 65. And so we should anticipate that the calls for medical services are going to continue to rise. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, and that was the exact vein that I wanted to kind of talk on too, and just the idea of, because we're in this budget process, there really are some other policy things that I think we could talk about, so I was just kind of hoping to plant a little seed about maybe the Public Safety Committee could talk a little bit more about really what our needs are, and for the very reason that Mr. Peterson brought up, I look around at my friends and they're getting older. So we can agree on that, right, Fred?
We're dying as fast as we can.
No, we're not. But there is just a huge emergency medical response component to what's in the fire department, and I think that just basically should lead us into a bigger conversation about how we do reflect that in the budget. And and how we do prepare for that, and I think it'd be a great conversation. So we should probably see if we can start that after this. So.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And before I turn it over to you, Mr. Constant, Dick Cheney is in the room, and he is famous for saying the line that the Assembly is the legislative body and that we set policy. Right? He is famous for that. So thank you for that reminder, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I really appreciate the concept of taking time at the Public Safety Committee to set out an effort to create a benchmark of what ideal would be like in both public safety categories, the EMS, fire, and police. And that way we have had that conversation, and that can help us drive policies referred to. That's a great idea.
And it's a good job for the Budget Committee.
Right. But once we get the numbers, then we send it to them how we pay for it. And I think that now over the years, I'm not going to hammer too hard right now on the talk of overtime versus, what we're going to do right now to keep all of our engines and pieces of equipment in use or in function. But we have, I hear this conversation a lot about we're becoming an EMS system. We need to invest there, but it doesn't change the baseline that we need a system that is a formula, essentially, able to fight whatever cause of harm that we are going to see. So we need a baseline. Even if 90% of the need is for ambulances, we need to be able to put out the fires when they come, because they will come. And so we have to ensure we use our best judgment in that account. And I'll just say one last thing in defense of my friend Ms. Demboski. I have heard her speak to making cuts in the fire department, but I never heard her make any moves towards the police budget. In fact, she always supported that. And I just want to speak on behalf of her reputation that I think that she did you could definitely say that her plank was public safety, not some kind of side work, because her husband works for the fire department. She was crystal clear in making those delineations. So I just have to speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions on the fire department budget. Thank you so much.
Hello, Chief.
Oh,
So she's not only got an operating role,
Oh,
she
that's
has a little
right.
capital side. So for the fire department, they have a.
And actually, I think Mr. Falsey wants to
I'll just
chime
chime in to
in.
give you one additional data point. The number is actually 30 times more calls for EMS. We had 24,000 EMS calls in 2017 and 800 fires. So that factor for you to factor 30.
Real quick, we had 2 deaths this week by fire, right? And so that reality, that reality is so stark that if it comes to you, you want them to be there. It's like having insurance. You need it there when you want it. And so,
Thank you.
Okay, so real quick, fire department has $3.8 million that will be in the fire department. These projects will be divided in 2. There will be a fire bond, and then there will be part of these will be an area wide. So the facilities, that's to do some work primarily in electrical and at Fire Station 1. I mean, basically, they have some difficulty keeping some of the bays heated, and so they got some work they need to do there. The ambulance replacements, that's 4 ambulance replacements, and then 1 ladder truck, and then for the life packs and the CPR monitors. So the ambulances and the life packs will be on an area wide. The ladder truck and the APD or AFD facilities will be on fire. And then the chief, and she can tell you, and I can tell you because I've been there in the past, and Alan Chikowski over at Maintenance and Operations, they have a shop over off of Airport Heights by Old Station 3 was built in like 1984. We've added stations, we've added equipment, shop's in real need of improvements and expansion. So we have a design hit in 2020 bond that would start that process, decide exactly how many bays. They also have some improvements inside the existing facility that need to be done. So in 2021, you will see a bond for $4.5 to $5 million to actually build and rebuild that shop in the fire department. So that's kind of a synopsis there, and I don't know if the chief wants to add to any of that. If you guys have questions.
Let's get any questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well done, man.
All right. So project management engineering, Kent, many of you, Kent Colhayes, our new PM&E director. I think for Kent, most of his world is in the bonds. However, in 2019, they have, while he has a larger department than the 8 that you see here, because in 2000, I think it was in the first half of 2018, we moved about 20 of their positions outside of the operating budget, and we show them that are supporting with capital projects. So they work on the bonds, and so they charge through the bonds, but they're people inside the department. These 8 are primarily in watershed management, so their fees are their staffing is supported in part by fees and resources there. If you look at their continuation budget based on these 8, these individuals, they have a small increase, and that's based on their labor contracts. Outside that, Kent doesn't have significant changes inside the department operationally. I know he's making some changes based on the project levels that we have going on. I think Mr. Hansen mentioned to you, and Kent can correct me if I'm wrong, but the amount of capital work that we're coming in the door is changing, whether the sources of those funds are changing, so making changes to the staff to accommodate those things. But most of what I wanted to share on the operating, and if you have any questions on watershed or the operating, we can take this opportunity, but I want to spend most of our time talking about the capital program, because the drainage, the roads, pretty much everything is going to be inside the capital program. And so unless you have some questions on operating, we'll jump to capital.
I do have one. Mr. Dunbar. Oh, never mind. 2.
Yeah, I have one question on operating, one question on capital. So it's a sort of a conceptual question. I had a constituent challenge me at a community council meeting about the necessity for a stormwater utility, because they said, basically, you do watershed management, isn't that enough? Don't you already handle stormwater? And I guess I'm wondering, Ken, if you could articulate whether you do have a comprehensive plan for stormwater in this city, and if so, do we need to have a stormwater utility?
I'm not sure I'm the best one to answer that. I'll offer my thoughts.
Sure.
I don't think that we have a truly comprehensive plan right now. We're fairly reactive to problems that arise. Street maintenance, Paul and Ski do a great job of assessing the condition of the storm drain and tackling problems as they come up. One of the problems that we face, and I dealt with it when I worked in private development downstairs, is when a new development comes online, a new private subdivision comes online, quite often that developer is faced with some improvement costs that perhaps are not really their responsibility, but the city doesn't have a mechanism to pay for them. So I think what a stormwater utility will bring is an ability to plan further ahead and to look at improving infrastructure that has failed. But I haven't had much involvement in the stormwater utility discussion. I'm speaking to it more from the project management side and my experience in private development.
Thank you. Could you put me back into the queue just for the when we've gone through the capital side?
Mr. Wendell.
This could be totally confusing. You can tell me that if I do. But when we do a project like a bond, you have a certain percent, it's fairly high, goes towards overhead, which goes into our operating budget. And now if we've moved all the positions related to that bond into the capital budget, should we be doing that? Is it like 12% or something like that goes to overhead? It seems like that's what those positions.
So I'll two parts. Yes, there's a cost to overhead to managing the bonds through purchasing, procurement, all of those kinds of things. So there's an overhead. I don't know what the percentage is, but I can get that back to you. And then the cost to actually deliver the project management cost to deliver the reconstruction of commercial or manage the design of the drainage on Melchina. There's a cost to that, and that cost is actually charged to the bond. That's really, frankly, it's no different than we've been doing it for decades. The only difference is that when we had it in when we did it in SAP, it wouldn't allow you to charge to your operating budget, then take it out of your operating budget, and then charge it to the capital. We couldn't do that, and so what we had to do was just take that place out. So we took it out of their operating budget, and they go straight into the capital project. So what we're doing now is not new to the way we've been doing it since we've been bonding for capital work. But I can find out what the exact percentage is on, if we had a $1 million road paving job, how much of that goes to administrative costs here on overhead and how much of it goes to project management. We can totally find that out.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I don't have any other operating questions.
Okay, so let's get to the good stuff. So I'm sure that you guys have a lot of questions on the capital budget, and rather than go through each one of these, I'm going to highlight some and may want to highlight a couple others. If you have particular questions or details about any one of these, we can try to answer them today, or we can follow up. But as I mentioned, you should have a sheet that looks something like this, and it's a kind of a summary of the projects for 2020 that are bond. So again, I did this for planning and zoning. We presented this proposed capital budget not only for roads and for parks and for everything else to the Planning and Zoning Commission in their role to review the capital improvement program. They did that Monday, passed a resolution in support of the 2020 capital program, and you should expect a resolution from them. The list that you see here, this is in alphabetical order. This is the way that it's presented in the capital improvement program for capital improvements. It's in a different order than what's on this sheet. This sheet breaks it out by type. So let me just kind of highlight some of the significant ones. The 36th Avenue from Old Seward to Lake Otis Parkway, that's a really big project. That $3 million is doing the first phase, which would basically be from New Seward Highway to Latouche. It doesn't include the rest of the other piece. We are in some conversations about Academy Drive Vanguard, for those that are not familiar with this one, it's in South Anchorage. It's on the east side of Scooter over by Abbott Boot Turn. That $4 million is a right-of-way hit. We already have $3 million in right-of-way. This $4 million, and then there's two other hits of money in the future. And this is basically induced by a need, and whether or not we actually continue with this process is up to conversation, buzz of what's going on at the state level. Commercial Drive is a big one. That's a repaving of Post and Mountain View Drive. That's a construction project. Downtown lighting is design and construction. Image and reflection over in East Anchorage. That's a construction project of a project we've been working on for the last 2 bond projects. And then the Old Seward Highway resurfacing. Pleasant Valley also over in the East Anchorage area to do some rehab, and we've been working on that one. I think we did some construction last year. This is another hit of construction to continue that. They have a significant amount of drainage issues and problems we're trying to solve there. And then West 32nd Avenue, East 33rd, so that's over by C Street, but basically from Spenard all the way to the Seward Highway is the scope of the work. This would be from, I think, Arctic, from Spenard all the way to Arctic Boulevard, I think is the phase there. We're going to do this one in pieces. So these are the projects that are in PM&E's world. You'll see projects in Ms. Mormello's world in traffic, but you know, I'm reminded of a comment that was made earlier about how much do you need. I will tell you that PM&E sent us a proposed list capital program of $82 million. They could probably deliver and meet it all. That doesn't even include the facilities. That's just the horizontal stuff. So if we're looking at how much we're trying to, take care of and what our needs are, our infrastructure is in a similar situation, but we are, we're trying to be mindful of our operating side and the tolerance and the resources that we have related to also the debt we're retiring on the bonds. And I think this is on the PM&E side of the world, and then general government, as I mentioned earlier. The total amount of the bond is going to be about $57 million. Then we have a Girdwood piece, which will add another $2 million, but Girdwood will be responsible. That gets us to 59 plus. But for a long time, I think project management engineering and Kent's predecessors have done a really good job to try to manage this stuff. We also have a lot of this work that's done in-house because it's cheaper. Alley paving, like some of the intersection resurfacings, we can do that more efficiently, more timely, more responsive than we could possibly do another way. So I think our capital program is pretty solid. You're not going to see a lot of sexy stuff in here. That's probably the most disappointing part from planning and zoning. So I think that's where we are on the capital side. But again, if you have any questions, I think Kent can take a stab at them, or we can get you a deeper response later.
Thank you. Questions for you, Mr. Dunbar?
So this is a pretty specific question for Kent and for Lance. There is in Northeast Community Council, there is a desire to help link up our trail system from a portion that ends around Cheney Lake to the trail that we're building around Trenchman Muldoon Park. And there's sort of one route that would go south through the woods, and we have to build a trail there. But the problem is it would be very expensive, and it would go through a number of backyards. And so Parks Department at this point is saying that's really not viable. Instead, let's take a northern route where the bike trail would come out of Cheney Lake and then go along a road for about a block until it links up to another 2 blocks, until it links up to another part of the trail. So my question is, so it's a park project, but it's on a road. So how would we do that? How would we program that?
Let me jump, and then Kent can correct me if I'm wrong. When we build this list, we're not only in consultation and coordination with Kent and the planning department and Josh and John prior and street maintenance, and try to make sure that if we have a need that we're building a road and we can add the trail, we add it to the road. There are times when a trail project would be inside a road right away. The lead would likely be PM&E for that particular project because most of the trail projects along roads are part of the road right away. But if they're separate from the road right away, the parks would be leading it.
But in this case, I don't think there's not even, it's a fully developed street with houses on both sides. There's not really a way to build a trail. Basically, what we're trying to do is turn the sidewalk or a bike lane into part of the quote-unquote trail system. So how would we do that? And
I'll give you the short answer.
Yeah.
You have to rebuild the road, move the gutter, and add a trail. And that's how it would be done.
So, okay. Like if I wanted to add striping and signage.
Unless you wanted to buy houses.
No, if I just wanted to add, let's say I just wanted to add signage and striping.
That if you have enough width inside the lanes of the roads, I mean that can be accommodated, and that would be a conversation between PM&E and traffic.
PM&E and traffic. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
You know, I'd be curious to see that full list. I mean, do you have a list like this, but then you cut off the bottom?
Oh, yeah.
We do. We have a 6-year CIP list. Pretty much every identified project, they're ranked by a committee based on a bunch of criteria, and we can send you a copy of those. We could send it to the entire body.
Electronic would be fine
Yes.
for me. And then I think your criteria too. So you've ranked all of them and you just taken the ones that ranked highest?
Well, we get a list that had the highest ones, and the list went to 80 million, and we didn't have that much, so we added their priorities in this proposal.
Oh, I'd like to see what didn't make the cut. So
Yes.
that would be really useful. And then, can I mean, you know, talking on the stormwater utility, so a lot of these are road and stormwater. Of course, they're closely linked. Do you have a way to break those out? Because it would be useful to know on this list how much you would say, even roughly, you said 80% of a road is stormwater or something like that, so you break that out. And then on that list at 85 million, how much is that stormwater? I mean, we're told we have this huge backlog. I imagine there's a lot of storm drain stuff on there.
Yeah, we can give you that breakdown. It's sometimes not as simple as it seems. If a storm drain is failing and the road is substandard, we would normally work to bring the road up to a current standard. Pleasant Valley is a great example. We're spending more money there to put in curb and gutter and sidewalks than we would if we were just fixing a drainage problem. But yes, we can take a stab at breaking out the road construction costs or the road improvement costs and the drainage costs. Would you like that for this list, or?
Well, I don't want to give you a huge job, but this list would be certainly useful if you do the whole list. That would be good. And I'm guessing that when this study is being done, the consultant's going to ask you for that information anyway.
We will see what we can get you, and if it doesn't meet your needs, let me know.
Don't hire a new person to answer my question. Just a broad range would work for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you. So my first question is sort of an organizational question. So there's this list, there's this map, which doesn't really identify things by district, but you can sort of figure it out. So there's no list by district.
There is not.
All. And
or community council, because I think someone asked me that question too.
yeah, I mean, we just have people asking for that. I don't know how difficult it would be to do that. I'd be interested to see how resources are distributed in different. I mean, I look at South Anchorage. There's like very little on here. East Anchorage and downtown has a lot of love. So it's just sort of interesting, like how we select those and how it goes per district. So I guess any info you can put together about that. And then, and it's okay if they're different for some reason. I'm not saying they have to be the same. I'm just curious. And then I think it would be useful to have a discussion at some point about how much we believe we can bond for. Because we sort of have this fake number, like, oh, this worked last time, so we'll do that and maybe add a little, but who's making those calls? I mean, I guess ultimately we're making those calls, but how do we, Ona wants to answer this, so I'll just finish quickly. How do we decide that? And should we have a deep dive into what are other cities doing? You know, what factors do we use to determine? Is there a percentage of how many times it's passed, at what rate? Anyway.
Through the chair to Ms. Quinn Davidson, I think to answer a previous question, that one of the reasons that South Anchorage tends to be more sparse than others is because they're outside of ARCSA. But to answer your question about bonding for residents, we have some of that information comparatively over years. What it looks like from 20 years ago, what it looks like from 30 years ago, what it looks like from and the relationship to per capita and the decrease over time based on inflation, et cetera, et cetera. So we have some of that information available. We can give it to you. Shoot, I can't remember what the other thing I was going to say is. But I agree that I think that a larger sort of umbrella conversation about what does this mean is a great idea.
Yeah, and just sort of a deep dive. I mean, there must be experts on this because it's millions and millions of dollars. And so how are we making those decisions? And is there more opportunity to do more of the projects on the list? And maybe the public would actually support that. So I don't know if that's something we could get into for the long term.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Quinn. Ms. Sauer.
Thank you. A couple of questions on this list. Do we have any information where also private resources might be leveraged?
So,
because I think that would be good to let people know.
That would that list, that's just a cut and paste of the project descriptions right out of your capital improvement budget book.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we'd have to like research whether or not there were also private opportunities leveraged against any of these? Like some of the parks improvements or others?
Yep.
Okay. Again, through the chair to Ms. Alice Hell, a lot of the parks projects are performed in conjunction with the Parks Foundation, which is raising private capital. So they usually work in tandem on those kinds of things, so we can provide that. Some of the other projects, I think, particularly when they are road projects and they're in our right-of-way, leveraging private participation is not possible. But for parks projects and some of the other projects, I think we can look at that to see if and where it is happening.
Okay. Second is on the sound barrier retaining wall replacement. This is a hot issue for those that live particularly near the New Stewart Highway. I mean, the idea, it says identify sound barrier retaining walls that need replaced and replace them. I mean, that just seems like, I get the use of it, but sound barrier walls aren't great. And there's a lot of complaint about having to live near a sound barrier wall. And so is this just a Band-Aid with like better plans to maybe do something else, or what's the rationale here? And it's not very much money, so.
I'll start, and then Kent can correct me, or Alan can jump in. So a lot of the sound barrier walls that are installed right now are part of projects that were built with federal funds, and then when this request for the sound barrier walls went in, there was an obligation that we would maintain and fix them once they were in place. They get hit, they get broken, they fall down. And so these resources are available to do that fix, break, or if there's an additional length or some other modification to that, not only on those, but our local streets. But it's kind of a repair and break fix as it comes in, and that number is based on traditionally what they spend.
Okay. And last question, because Mr. Weddleton didn't mention it at all. The Academy Vanguard, and I am new to the body, but you said that there was already $3 million allocated for right-of-way, and this is an additional $4 million?
That's what I said.
And I'm going to need some education here. And I know we have a meeting next week, so we won't deep dive too much, but is this a state road project or a municipal road project?
Municipal.
That's a lot of money for a right-of-way. I don't really have a question about that, but that is a lot of money for right-of-way. And did that come out of a plan, like a neighborhood plan or anything else?
Well, do you guys have a separate work meeting on this?
Wow. This is a big project.
We do have individual meetings on this, but I don't think we have a body.
Okay. I mean,
we could talk about this for a long time. So
I could provide
we
a
get out here
30
before 5 o'clock.
okay.
I could provide a 30-second snapshot, or we
So
can.
I have a more specific question.
Yes.
How does $7 million for right-of-way acquisition compare to other road projects we do in town?
I would say this is on the high end. This project is buying one building. It's actually buying two buildings with the alignment that would require this funding. It's buying two separate buildings. Not only are we buying the buildings, we're relocating the tenants from the building they're in to the new building, and we renovate the new building to bring it up to the philosophy is we make them whole. So if it's a medical office, the new building needs to accommodate the medical offices that move in. So I can't give you a history of right-of-way acquisition costs on other projects. I could sure get that. Spinard Road was a recent one. I could get those numbers, but this would right-of-way acquisition on this project, on this alignment, would be on the order of 30 to 40% of the total budget.
And just for my edification, if you could email me the criteria for right-of-way acquisition in terms of like the making whole or wherever that is, so I can better educate myself and those who ask about it, I think that would be helpful, because that's one of the most expensive projects on this list. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. So, in our first meeting this morning, the lady, the young woman from Iran, talked about what an amazing community this is, the community spirit and cohesiveness. There's another criteria by which we do really well, and that's volunteers. And it's inspiring and so on. So when it talks to building use trails and so on and so forth, volunteers can do that, but the bureaucratic barriers are amazing, and it takes some work, and so Parks and Rec know where some of these trails need to go. People, that can be done right away is there, and then there needs to be somebody there. This is the kind of standard we want for this, and then let the volunteers go and do it. But you'll be amazed at the stuff you'll run into. People in the bureaucracy, rightly or wrongly, say, well, we've got to be really careful. Let's build the standards. As my wife says, substandard is better than nothing. And having a trail there and lots of users will improve it as time goes on. But that's an issue. And then there's liability. If the city sanctions the building of a trail and somebody twists their ankle or whatever, those are solvable problems. The Parks and Rec Commission, advisory board, those are a good bunch, and those are eager folks that would work on these things if we could let them loose. Another one that jumps up is the union contracts. Anything you're doing with volunteers that would take away from a union hand can get some people's knickers in a knot and their hair on fire, and mostly that's not the rank and file city employees. It's their leadership that say, no, the darn contract says you can't contract out any union work, and so on. So, but there's huge benefits for the citizens and the volunteers if we can eliminate some of those barriers, and they are tough. Boy Scouts was a huge influence in my young, misguided life, and I'm on the state board. We have scores of Eagle Scout projects, guys looking to do work that serves the community, and they're pretty neat kids, and so on. So, and in our area, we've had a volunteer fire department. Are they as good as the professionals? No. Are they quick as responding? No. But they are still far better than nothing, and there's a huge cadre of trained medical responders and firefighters, that can be there pretty quickly, and a huge part of the solution. And it's been part of the kind of background thing, much more in the past, that the fire union was fighting to get rid of our volunteer fire departments. And we have a little combination now that works well. But those are all problem barriers from both the public being served and getting the job done that I think we ought to pay a lot of attention to and eliminate those barriers. I tried one time to get corrections guests, people in jail, on work parties, and our correction system is so overcrowded and crisis driven they can't classify the inmates into those who are safe, and so on and so forth, and get them out doing it. And sadly, lots of people do that really well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
I just wanted to clarify something that was stated. Most of the parcels in South Anchorage Assembly District are within ARD's Bay Shore, Southport, Ocean View, and so on, Lower Hillside, Independence Park, and so on. It's just that South Anchorage is very giving. And we ask so little. You're welcome.
As a person who lives on the hillside.
Right. Okay, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Compared to other projects, this item, the Alaska Railroad Crossing rehabs, is small, but John and I hear regularly from constituents about this one. I understand it's a contractual obligation in terms of the work that needs to be done. Any chance that we'll be renegotiating that contract or that obligation will go away? There's some heartburn that the city has to absorb this cost.
I'll have to do some research. My understanding is that it's railroad right-of-way. Our road crosses their right-of-way. We have a permit. So I think that where we try to renegotiate, they remain in control of the fate of that negotiation. because it's their land.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
So in defense of my neighborhood, I would say that there really are 3 projects that are specific to the downtown, and one project that is midtown and downtown, which is roughly 10% of the total projects listed, which roughly is equitable to the nature of the city. It's not highly concentrated in the downtown. They just look like they're concentrated because they're close on the map. And to Mr. Weddleton's point,
Sorry, guys, I didn't mean to get everyone on.
we're about to give you $4 million.
I don't want it.
I
Please
know.
take it.
We're about to give it to you.
It's all yours.
Your generous nature, we're going to give back to you.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Let's not even open that kind of worms. All right, Mr. Weddleton.
I forgot.
Okay.
Railroad, I'm sorry. Well, I think we were at 500,000 a year. I noted this is about half what we had been doing. And my belief is that contract with the railroad is up this year or next. Is that right, Bill? What think you'd say? Because we were looking at it a couple of years ago.
We'll look into it because I think it's not a blanket. It's by location, and there may be a group by location, and then I can also check on the amount.
So coincidentally, it was $500,000, but now
I
there's
will
some other
find out.
projects.
Yep.
If you're checking, can you see if this includes the work to get, so they don't have to do this, the whistle at, not the firing range, but N-Star? This is not included.
I don't think it is.
Stephanie would be the witness for that. The answer is no.
Because that's about $250,000 to do that.
It's not within municipal right of way. It's outside of ARSA. There's not a way to do that.
Speed bumps. Those are just
Speed bumps on a railroad track.
Thank
you. Yeah, sure, Mr. Dobar.
So looking at the capital budget, page 39, there's a section for Anchorage Safe Routes to Schools. And but it doesn't start until 2022. This is something that I've become more interested in due to a recent tragedy in my district. For example, if we were to
Just point of order, can you show me?
Oh, page 39 in the packet, the capital packet.
But they're not.
PM&E 39. So, if we were to shift that forward, slide it to the left, and start funding it this year, do we have quote unquote shovel ready projects, or even projects that are ready to enter that design phase? Is there a reason that it's 3 years out?
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Dunbar, if I could ask you to just hold it until Ms. Mormillo gets up, because it's going to be managed through the traffic department. I mean, I saw it's in PM&E, but it will be something that Stephanie and her team will actually do. So,
but it would end up on this bond if we did it.
Because I also want to make sure that because I think that we have. Let's ask Stephanie, because I think we have money to do safety, school zone improvements, because we're doing it with the district as well.
Yeah.
They have a list of projects they probably intend to do.
But I think I could find you $4 million more this year and $9 million more next year that could go towards this goal.
But we might be able to find. Yeah, we can hear from Stephanie if their things are shovel ready.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any more questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, yes.
Can I make a comment? I've been corresponding with member Quinn Davidson about providing some more information regarding how the CIP list is developed. And we've talked about PM&E presenting some information in January. I will certainly provide the CIP list and the criteria in advance of that, but that should be informational. Also, with respect to work in South Anchorage, I would just point out that this list is a snapshot of what's happening next year. We are reconstructing Campbell Wood subdivision. We did some work this year. That'll be on a future bond package. There's some work on 120th Avenue. So the 6-year CIP list will better inform how work is distributed around town and where we're focusing our efforts. So thank you very much.
Just to follow up, Desiree and I have been working with Kent to get that handled as part of our continuing ed.
Okay. Thank you.
It is? It's for January. Sweet.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, can we take 10 minutes?
Sure.
Can we take a break?
All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started again.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're going to start off with maintenance and operations. And then we'll move into the second packet of information. I think Desiree would pass that around. So we're on the last few pages of the part one, which is maintenance operations. So inside maintenance and operations, as I mentioned, their revised budget includes the total amount of debt for bonds, because they're responsible for the debt service inside their budget, primarily for the road. So of that 88 million, roughly 42 of it is for debt, and then about 43 to 44 is for their day-to-day operations. So similarly, we make the adjustments for the amount of bond debt that we're retiring. We take that out, make some adjustments there, and then we look at what we're going to do for continuation for maintenance and operations. So we have those salaries and adjustments based on their labor contracts. The fleet adjustments in line with the projected fleet changes that we're making, not only by the APD fleet, but also inside maintenance operations. So they will get a small increase in the continuation for the management of the fleet. They get a small slice of the hotel no-tail tax in total. One of the things that this department has struggled with in the past, and that is as utility rates have gone up, we have not made any adjustments to give them additional resources to pay utility bills. So they are the department responsible for paying the heating and electric and lights for all municipal departments, unless it's unless there's a separate contract for that. But basically, they're responsible for paying the light bill. So this proposal would have an increase in their utilities for 2020 at $300,000. This is not new. It's just it's something they've been sucking it up and not doing other things in order to pay for this. So that gives us a continuation budget. One of the things that we are responsible to do, or we do every 2 or 3 years, is we do a road survey, a road condition survey. We basically look at the condition of our pavement, and so how we actually, how we take care of that, and that is then related to what the CFO does and the controller does when we put together our asset management plan for the bond rating agencies. That tells us, are we maintaining the services that we have? This survey we do on a regular basis to help identify the condition of the pavement. It's also helpful not only for Alan and his team, but for Kent and his team when they're looking at, you'll see in the descriptions for projects, surface condition D or surface condition F. A lot of that information is generated in part by the report here. So this is a one-time expense because we don't do it annually. Then we look at the changes that we want to make in maintenance and operations. We make the adjustment for voter-approved debt for both, and these are for 2 different years. These are when projects come online. And then inside the proposal, you'll see a line item to start implementing the climate action plan, specifically as it related to energy efficiency and feasibility things. Since Alan and his team are responsible for the municipal facilities, the changes that would be made to gain those efficiencies are primarily going to be in Alan's shop. But he will have some support for that, but the resources will be identified there, and so that's where that money is identified. The small cell equipment installations, these are I think Mr. Schutte and the Assembly is aware of this. We have a small cell equipment installations and lighting all over the place. This $12,000 is matched with a revenue source coming from those. When you look inside the AM support, you'll see this $12,000 expense. You'll see a $12,000 revenue coming as well, and I can't remember the exact source, but it's not general government money. It's coming from the people that want to provide that do small cell equipment. And then the last thing is, I mentioned this when we talked about APD briefly, is a proposal to add in $200,000 into the fleet budget, primarily for maintenance. The fleet department has over 1,000 vehicles all across the municipality, from escapes to graders to APD. Roughly 40% of their entire fleet is inside APD that they manage. Everything else, from parks and traffic and development services, everyone else, they maintain that fleet. The fleet is continuing to age, thus there's a need for more repair and the need for more resources to make those repairs happen. So we're proposing a $200,000 adjustment inside their maintenance budget, particularly as it relates to their fleet. We've had a lot of conversations about changes that we've been able to make, and then the things that we need to be doing, not only we are in 2020 for general government and for APD, but our fleet as a whole, like our facilities, is aging, and we're going to get to a point where we're going to have a lot of the fleet that's going to be 20 years or older, and we need to start making some changes in those things. We haven't been doing it in the past, and they've been doing a great job maintaining it, and this is kind of the first step to start picking that up. And the administration's been talking about what do we do on a larger scale to sort of pick that fleet up, because we have not been replacing it on the replacement schedule, but this is a need they have to sort of keep what we have moving along. So that is a summary of maintenance and operations, and many of you know Alan and Paul. They do a lot of stuff all year long, so and support a lot of departments and the stuff that they do in transit, traffic, PM&E. So anyway, do a lot of work with a little bit of work, a little bit of money. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Actually, my question's related to the next slide.
Okay. You want to go to capital?
Actually, I have one more question.
Okay.
Mr. Webb.
So what work is being done on the small cell equipment?
Basically, that $12,000 is a fee, is a reimbursement to us to pay for the utilities, if I'm not mistaken, correct, Paul?
So right now we are, AT&T is giving us plans for 15 sites to put up these small cell towers. Currently there are 5 installed. We're looking at doing 10 more, and part of this money they are responsible for reimbursing for the power, inspection fees. There's some right-of-way costs. I can't speak for developmental services, but this is pretty much covering their costs.
Okay.
So it's just a reimbursement to us for our work.
I think there's more than that's AT&T.
Well, that's only the ones that on poles that we own. Chugach and MLP is also doing a group of them.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I don't have any other questions on operating.
All right, going on to capital. So part of the capital improvement from the first slide that we showed you, the maintenance and operations department is responsible for facilities and fleet. So inside the proposed bond, you'll see $1.3 million for some capital improvements to the Anchorage area-wide network. Most of this is to add capacity to the towers that we have out of the Anchorage Regional Landfill to reach up inside Eagle River and then down into Chugach. There also provide more channel coverage in that area. It also allows us to provide more coverage into the Girdwood area, so we bounce off of Hope and go back into that area there. It's basically to add capacity, and we've been working on improving this infrastructure for the last couple of years. We've had bond improvements. This one is specifically not to add upgrades as much as it is to add capacity to the communication. So that's what that one's about. The Anchorage Senior Center, some improvements in there on the roof, some ADA improvements, seismic, electrical, code, there's a variety of improvements in there. The APD fleet, that's, I think, 36 vehicles at $65,000 a copy, drive away off the lot. And then the Chugach Senior Center, again, seismic. There's some HVAC work. They have some special activity spaces that they want to do out in the Chugach Eagle River area. Facility code upgrades, that is inside the Bering Street shop, and I believe it also includes some lighting improvements at West High School. And then the last one, while it's in maintenance and operations, it is a facility, so they would have a handle in managing the work for a project to replace the Glacier Valley City Hall down in Girdwood. So inside their house, it looks like about $10 million in capital improvements, but where they will actually occur, they will all be in an area-wide facilities bond, except for the Girdwood one. That will be a standalone proposition. And then we have a lot of requests on the state. We see there, I mean, there's a lot of needs on facilities. We have a lot of these facilities were built 20, 30 years ago. And so, you might think, why do we put the money in there and the state not give us any money? On their hand, if the state has any money and they want to know what our priorities are, they look at our capital book, or they talk to you, or they talk to the administration, and go, it's a good place to start. And so I think those are the big highlights from this one, unless you guys have questions.
Any questions? Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, and I think you just answered it, but I think it's worth reiterating, especially for the new members for whom this is the first budget cycle. And you might already know this, but we have this huge list of state projects. You'll see it every year, and this is only a fraction of it. I think it's more than $100 million usually, or it's certainly in the many tens of millions of dollars. It's the kind of thing we used to get funded by the state, and with very few exceptions, we get none of it. And it represents a huge sort of wealth transfer, if you will. These things that used to be provided to the people of Anchorage, they're no longer provided. We're talking about critical maintenance. But I guess my question to Lance is, of these state projects that we would traditionally get funded, how many of these do you think will actually get funded, and how much of these are sort of illusory budget line items?
If I knew how the state was going to spend their money, I'd probably.
Mona has some
Yeah,
thoughts.
but let me. I think some of these things are opportunities. Let's say for facility maintenance, or if we need to do. There's a small upgrade to Dempsey Anderson that the state has the ability to do that. I would be. I don't know what they'll do, but I would be surprised if we get more than $1 or $2 million, and it's going to be at a discretionary level on the capital side. I would like for them to give us at least half of it, and then. But I think this is a place for them to look to know where our priorities are. And I think, as Kent alluded to, and Alan can back me up, there's a lot of need in here. I think Mr. Dunbar, as you mentioned, this list has included projects to 50, almost 100 million in the past. But I don't know how much they would, in the past, if they have $200,000 and they're, I don't know how the legislature prioritizes or delivers their capital program. So, but if the opportunity arises, at least they can see these are things that we would like to see them spend their money on, even if it's not the entire amount.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Browse.
Through the chair to Mr. Dunbar, I think the blunt answer to your question is none of it. The state is likely to fund none of these projects. Over the last few years, aside from the total decrease in capital budget items for projects like this, we have seen the fight take place over sort of a different level of capital investment. Are we going to put money towards treatment and homeless services? Are we going to put money towards, large infrastructure projects? The state, starting I think probably 5 years ago or more, has abandoned its traditional capital budget process, which included categorized lists from each House member and each Senate member that was then carried up to the finance committees for approval. There were certain allocations of dollar amounts that were given to each office, and they would be able to choose amongst the capital requests that we make and the capital requests that the school district makes, because they're different. And then obviously the individual organizational requests that come across through all of the legislative fly-ins. So if you're a legislator sitting in an office with all of your capital requests, either specifically for your district or for the community you represent at large, you could have $400 million worth of requests in front of you. The likelihood of any of these types of projects being funded is very, very small. Depending on what each individual legislator chooses to pick up, having this information illustrated, as you said, is important. And having conversations with them as the assembly members who represent each one of these districts is also good. But the chances of it being funded is not good.
Okay, one follow-up on that. Just a quick statement.
Sure.
Yesterday at a community council, this is not the first time this has happened, a particular assembly member, state house member, basically said, we know that there's this one capital project that's on Valley Road, needs to be funded. I'm going to keep pushing the municipality to put it on the bond. And me and Peter looking at each other like, this is exactly the kind of thing the state used to do, and now they're knocking on our door to put it on the bond, and it's not on the bond. Anyway.
Well, so yeah, I had myself in the queue to give a slightly different perspective. Shame on that one representative who's doing that, but I have talked to a prominent senator, Democratic senator, and a prominent Republican senator, and they want us to send a comprehensive list. Whether the governor will actually veto it or not, we'll see, but they want us to send a comprehensive list. So I think it's important for us to send this list, and I'm grateful that we continue to have it here, and then none of it gets funded. But I think it's going to be important for us, especially when it comes to our legislative program, that we send them a concrete list, even if it's a fairy tale, because they're asking me for it, and if they're asking me for it, we should give it to them. Then, Mr. Weddleton, you're next.
But following up on that, I think last year we just said Port of Alaska. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't work, so we'll try something different, or is this, where are we on this?
Through the chair to Mr. Weldon, this administration has historically, because we came into the first years of the no money situation, historically has limited the capital requests to the port. We've also included a treatment center as a request. We included sewer and highway funding for patrol officers. But it has been extremely limited. The legislative programs in the past have been upwards of 75 pages long. Our administration has submitted legislative programs anywhere from 1 to 7 pages. Most of it is focused on language changes that help the operations of the municipality. To go into what Mr. Rivera said, we have also had conversations with probably the same people you're mentioning there, and the request that we have heard is less of a comprehensive inclusion of a legislative program and more of a very specific, few items that they would like to see. But I will say that there is merit in the conversation of what would a traditional legislative program look like from Anchorage at this point in time? Because if we make the comparison between what they used to be and what they are now, it is a very visceral and visual reaction to what the state participation is at the local level.
Thank you. Next I have Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to follow up on what Ms. Browse said, when I was in the legislature, we got between $1 and $2 million from my district in the capital budget every year. And one year we got actually quite a bit more than that when they said, send us your wish list. And that was back in the good old days when we had a surplus. But I was wondering, what's the $975,000 that we need for the Sullivan Arena for, since we're not using it all that much now?
Chair, if I can. Facility is almost older than Forest Dunbar and has a lot of deferred maintenance costs. Not speaking that he does, but
he's in much better shape than Sullivan Arena.
Certainly cheaper for the city.
Who's that guy?
Mr. Schutte was unwilling to say older than the chair.
But you were, so there we go. Ms. Kennedy.
All right, I got to be serious now, right? Okay, so I absolutely appreciate the idea of giving our list to the state and seeing what happens, but I'm hoping that at some point we have Plan B. And that's kind of what I'm looking at, is at what point do we have to say, hey, these are enough of life safety issues. I mean, I'm looking at pool filtration system, for example, and I don't know if that's $2 million for one school or for all the pools.
For all of them.
For all of them. Okay, thank you. But it seems to me like if it does come to the point where we're really talking about things that could impact public safety and the health of people using some of these facilities, then we probably need to be able to say, hey, it's worth it to put this on a bond and see what happens. But anyway, same thing with contaminated sites. That kind of sounds a little disturbing. But anyway, so I'm just wondering at what point we, is our breaking point, so that we can kind of move forward with seeing if we can do our own thing. So you might have an answer.
If I may make a comment through the chair, Ms. Kennedy. The contaminated sites, we have them all identified through the DEC, and then progressively they ratchet up pressure on us to take care of them. So we're getting to the point where there's several of them that are kind of getting to the point where we've got to start doing something and start funding them. One of the ones is at the Beans Cafe, Brother Francis. That used to be a maintenance site. There's several through town, but it's just something we've tried for at least the 15 years that I've been the director to try to get money from the state, and there's just no funding available.
So can I follow up just on that one specifically then? At what point do we actually begin to get fined for not addressing these things? Is there a...
Usually they work with us, and we do what I'll call, we monitor a lot of these sites as well. So there is some cost there. We work with them to monitor them, but at some point in time, they usually start ratcheting up the pressure to, you have 2 years to do something, and then we talk to Lance or whoever's in that position and say, hey, we really got to do something, and we've got to look for a funding source. But we're doing it on a one-by-one basis. We were hoping that this, when we asked the state that over 3 or 4 years we could clean up all the sites and be done with it, but it just hasn't happened.
Thank you. Mrs. Prince.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I had something on that.
Oh.
I was just going to respond and say, through the chair to Ms. Kennedy, I think the administration agrees with you, and this dovetails nicely with what Ms. Quinn-Davidson said at the beginning of the meeting, which was, what is the bonding capacity per resident? How much could we do? Why are we focused on this number over this number? And so having a larger conversation about this entire list of projects, not just the ones that we are putting on the bonds. When it comes to life safety issues, I think that depending on how they're ranked, those will jump in the queue for the next bond or be added. But the conversation has stalled out because the state, the communities around the state have been waiting for the state government to reverse course or get their fiscal house in order or figure out the way that the funding could continue to come into the cities. At this point, that hasn't happened for years, and I think it's time to have the conversation about what it looks like to go it alone and what that means for the city. There are multiple structures in other jurisdictions, including the Valley and in the lower 48, that are large infrastructure packages that are supported by temporary sales taxes or other temporary revenue measures that are specific to those projects and are voter approved and then move forward. One of the difficulties that we have here is for something like a sales tax, the implementation period of a sales tax is anywhere from 12 to 24 months. And while we can have that conversation, the cure doesn't come for quite some time. But with the approval, we would be able to revenue bond and do all kinds of other things that would be helpful in solving this list.
Just add, as an example, the senior centers have been on the management and operations capital budget for a very long time. Until last year, they were pretty much all on the state requests. We're at a point right now that we know that is not going to be there, and we have to do something there. So we move them over to the bonds. Last year they were on the bonds, and the facility bond did not pass. So those things are continuing to deteriorate, but that doesn't mean that they're still not important. And I think as the list on the state, as Ms. Kennedy mentioned, there's a point in time where we get what we can with the bonds, and those state lists, whether it's the remediation or the pools, we get to a point where they have to come over to the bonds. But that leads to Ms. Rouse's point, which is how much can we put on there? And if the facility bond we put together has the senior centers and the communications, and it does not pass, the senior centers will not get fixed. That's a simple fact. They'll have to buy blue new tarps, and we'll be on our way.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question actually was on the same lines of that, as far as how was it decided what would go in the state column? Like the Anchorage Golf Course, $6.25 million may not scream out high priority to folks in the state. And also, since we just heard that PM&E has an 80-odd million list of capital priorities, well, nothing in theirs is listed in the state, in the state column.
Right.
So it would seem that a discussion about what the state should be covering is one thing, but we know clearly without the funding the state has had in the past, what they will cover is very different. So I guess my question is, how was it decided which is put forward for state funding, and how do we pull it all together so that we're reflecting priorities, but also recognizing we probably have to fund it all?
I think at a high level, the reason that you'll see most of the state requests on the M&O side is most of the requests for the state money is on the facilities, because those are the things that were built with state money. And when we built them with state money, there was no O&M associated with those things. They said, here's a gift, and they were great, but now we're 20, 30 years or however old Mr. Dunbar is, we have to figure out how to start putting that stuff together, and that's where we are.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I know. I'm poking at me. I love it. All right.
I hope you're not 15 years old because these are really good.
Hard to make a point.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So moving on, and thank you, Alan. Thank you, Paul. I have to bring up my other show. All right. So everyone should have a copy of
Sure. And actually, Mr. Wilbur, Ms. Allentown.
Thank you. What's the total bond package request? Total dollars. I know it's like broken up in here. Have you done the math? Because you don't want me to do the math.
59,870. 59,870, including dirt.
How much are we retiring?
I'll check, but about 37.
Thank you.
But the cost of 37 that we're retiring in today's dollars, if we had to replace the same roads in the same buildings, is probably around 55 or 50, somewhere in the middle 50s.
And that doesn't count any of the school district, right?
It does not. No, that's a whole different.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead to public transportation. So in Jamie's world, for 2019 budget, we had about $24 million of the 109 or the 165 folks she's got there. Roughly 96 or 98 of them are bus operators, and the rest of them are in the mechanics world. A lot of Jamie's budget is supported with, she has tax dollar support, but also a significant amount on the capital side and operating from the federal program. So she does have some bonds that she uses to match, so we'll modify the debt changes that we have for 19. The salaries and benefit adjustments for full year costing for 16 bus drivers. It's a big number for transit because this is what happened. In 2019, we made a decision to bring the neighborhood service that was originally contracted out inside, and we paid for it for half a year. So in 19, that number was like $700,000. It's a full year cost for all 16 bus operators inside this year. So that's what rolled into 2020. She has some needs for increases in contracts and software maintenance as it relates in part to her grant reporting to the FDA. So there's an additional request there. So that brings her to 25. We have talked about this. Jamie is going to be losing some Alaska Mental Health Trust money. I also think she's going to be losing a little bit of federal dollars, that other money to use to match federal dollars. So we're proposing that we add $185,000 inside their budget to help provide that matching available. And I think the last point I would make, because and I'll be brief, but there seems to be a theme. If Jamie could do whatever she wanted, she would have a lot more bus routes with a lot more headways. And so, trying to figure out where you get the most efficient service with the amount of resources that you have and the locations that you want. I think the public transportation department is doing a great job. Their ridership is up, and things are going very good for transit. So, anyway, I will leave it at that unless you have some questions about their budget. And if you have operational questions, we can touch on those. But if we need to get back to you, that would be great.
Yeah, I think we have one operating question. Mr. Dolan.
Yeah, Jamie or Vance. I remember a couple of years ago there was talk about, so we did the consolidations and we have the main routes, and then we have these smaller routes. And I think this might be what you're talking about, this 1.3 million, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. My understanding was that there were some federal grants that were coming to an end, and that was going to put at risk some of these smaller neighborhood routes, in particular a route that I care about very much that goes to Centennial Village. So where are we with that? Do we have those grants, and how does that relate to this 1.3 million?
So the 1.3 million is the service for the neighborhood routes. So that is going to be continuing through this budget cycle. The CMAQ money that we were using, the congestion management mitigation money that is slated for this, we are in our final year of that money. So we're moving forward. We are going to need to figure out what we can do to offset the grant money that we're
using currently. That money was for expansion of service. So moving forward, if we have an additional expansion of service, there's potential there to tap back into that. But we are in our final year at this point of the CMAQ money. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Presby.
Yeah, question, but just a quick response that my previous questions are not necessarily asking about whether you want more or not and why. It's is there any analysis done? Do we have any analysis or any information that helps us to make good decisions about where we are? And I realize that that's hard and it takes capacity and time and money and all of that. But I would ask that question in terms of has there been any study or has been any work to really try to get a sense of what our city needs and what would be adequate, not ideal, but what really in order to sort of serve the city in the way that we need? Has that work been done? And is that something that I could look at and so that I would have an understanding of why we would need more?
So we're at a point where we are just starting to have those conversations because for us, we are at a point where if we were going to start adding more service back, if there was a money tree that you all shook and suddenly you gave me $2.3 million, we do need to know that, okay, we're going to put 4 extra buses on the road. It's going to take this many operators. But then what does that do behind the scenes? What does that do to my admin team, the reporting that they have to do for those additional federal funds that we're now going to be able to leverage? What's it do to my maintenance staff? You know, we've got 4 additional buses that are going to come into the fleet. We're not at a staffing level currently where we could manage that. Operators, we would need more operators, obviously. Right now we've got 116 operators. That also means support staff for our operations supervisors. That means that, you know, my superintendent has, you know, additional staff and responsibilities as well. So we're starting to look at that. Our industry actually has tons of, I mean, there's literally a spreadsheet that we're going to start working on that says how many miles do you operate, how many buses are in your fleet, and it literally gives you kind of the best practice standard for that size. So if somebody's already created this wheel for us, we're just now going to start harnessing those tools and looking at what does it look like to provide, like you're saying, not pie in the sky service, but adequate service that gets people to where they need to go. There was something, I just got back from a conference last night, and one of the things that I heard was, if you can't get there, it doesn't exist for you. And I think about that all the time when we're talking about the gaps in service in our community. You know, in 2017, when we did the overhaul, we knew there were going to be gaps. How do we fill those gaps? And what are the resources that are required, not just to operate the system, but behind the scenes? So we're looking at that.
And just a quick follow-up. So based on what you just said to me, what's the justification for the increase this coming year?
Say that again.
What's the justification for the increase this coming year?
I'll jump in on that.
Sure.
This 16, those are bus operators that we brought on board. They're already hired. They were half year funded with the grant. Then we funded them half a year with operating through a continuation budget. We just continued those 16 on. We're not getting any more service with 16 new drivers. We're just continuing
for what we have.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Alta.
Thank you. So what was the loss of the mental health trust grant, or was that just a natural end to something?
No, unfortunately, through the state budget process, the mental health trust, they had roughly $1.3 million that were dedicated to a competitive grant program for what's called coordinated transportation. And Anchorage, the municipality, historically, at least the last 10 years that I've been involved, we had set aside for our community that was roughly $168,000 for us to compete and disperse throughout the community. The program was cut down to $300,000 statewide from 1.3, and that $300,000 now is going to be dispersed as they see fit through the state transit office. So we call it kind of the unicorn money. You know, we can use it as match for purchase of service on anchor rides. That's historically what we've used, or we can use it to purchase capital and match federal grants. So it's that money that we don't have enough of.
And so the current funds would be just to kind of keep Anchor Rides going as Anchor Rides is going right now?
Yeah, that's roughly a month of Anchor Rides trips.
Wow, yeah. All right, well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
So I had a constituent request to understand if you track and know the cost per trip. Is there an average? Do we have a unit cost that we can share with the public?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do, and I can get that to you. Is there a specific route that you're looking at?
You have it down. Well, yeah, sure. How about your largest, your least used, and then an average over the system?
I can get that to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I think that's it for operating.
All right, let's jump to capital real quick. So in Jamie's world, basically the amount of capital projects, this is about $2 million that would match the $12.6 million. And it's basically for the technology and the systems improvement she needs to basically run the technology side of her business. The bus shelters, bus improvements, actual physical facility improvements, and then facilities and fleet support and equipment that they actually have. All of those types of expenses, they're not new, they're not different. The thing that's new and different is the amount of money that's already programmed on the federal side of the house that we need to match. And so that jump, I think last year the number was around $700,000 or $800,000. So the federal portion was sort of closer to $9 million. So this is to a comparable match for the amount of federal money that will be available. It's both FTA, probably a little bit of federal highway money to support those things that are related to public transportation. So inside your packet that I gave you, there's probably more detail on transit about what that would be used for than any of the other departments, and it's basically a snap right out of the capital program. So if you have particular questions about a project or the timing, we can respond to those now or later. But take a look at them and then let us know.
Thank you. So I have a couple other questions, but I'm first in the queue. So I had a couple questions, more broadly speaking, not specific to these bonds, but and maybe you'll bring this up when we have our update later in the month. But first, I want to know how the transit talks went, and then second, when are those talks going to be reflected here? Because I think it's going to be pretty obvious that there were some suggestions on increasing routes. And so is any of that planned in here in the near future?
So no, because that is all operating dollars at that point. And so an additional request that we heard bubbled up loud and clear, heard the public. Transit talks went really well. We'll give you some more detail when we brief you in November. But we heard we want to be able to go to the library. We want to be able to get to the library. And so there was no fewer than 4 routes proposed that could somehow get, service to the library, downtown, South Anchorage, how can we connect them from Old Seward basically to the library and beyond. And that with there was a small capital portion, I believe reinstating those bus stops, it was going to be somewhere in the $700,000 range because they need to be brought up to ADA accessibility and they need to go live again. And then the actual service, for 30-minute service, it was around $2.3 million. And for our service, we just got some updated numbers and it was going to be about $1.5 million. And so we heard loud and clear that, people really want service to the library.
So if that's not reflected in this budget, will it be reflected in next year's budget?
I could say it's probably going to get requested.
It got requested.
It's going to get reflected.
Yeah, it did get requested. It was
Okay.
not passed up.
All right, thank you. Ms. Alato.
Thank you. Looking at the bonds and my previous question about the Anchor Rides cost, is some of the intention with the ADA upgrades is to make the regular routes more
accessible?
I was trying not to use that word.
It's okay.
Actually more appealing to individuals with disabilities to come down on the Anchor Rides. And then what work or coordination are you doing with other departments to ensure that routes from homes to bus stops might also tie in? I really like this work, but it has to be part of a bigger picture. Otherwise, it's going to be an upgraded bus stop, but someone can't get to it.
Absolutely. And so we were really closely with Humany and any of the upgrades. A lot of times when you see projects that are going to go in and touch a bus stop that are being done by Humany or by DOT, we will work in conjunction with them to make sure that the path of travel is accessible, to make sure that we have our bus stop in the right location, that it's at a safe crossing and things like that. So there's a lot of coordination that does go into play with a lot of different planning partners and then through the implementation. As it relates to ADA accessibility and how we do our bus stop improvements, so we have a plan that goes to FTA, and we basically say these are our top priorities for the next year. Basically, this is how we're going to use our federal funds. And ADA accessibility is always, at the top of that. And so when you're looking at Anchor Ride's eligibility, our first goal is to make sure that people are able to use the fixed route. And so that's always kind of the vein that we're looking at when we're looking at eligibility. Anchor Rides is it's a fantastic service, but it's last resort for us because it is our highest cost. And there's just so much more coverage available through the fixed route, and that whole idea of being integrated into the community, that's the fixed route. So
do we happen to have, or is it possible about it being, as John was saying, hiring another person to take that list of routes we're going to be upgrading for ADA accessibility and kind of our usage on Anchor Rides and kind of overlaying them to see if they line up at all, or if that can inform?
So I think one of the things that we can do is we can look at, so Anchor Rides has to operate within a quarter mile of the fixed route. And so what we can do probably, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question so much because I don't know that we have actual mapping capabilities of where we're picking people up in conjunction to that, but I can look into that.
Sure.
But
Great.
We can definitely look at where the improvements are going and whether is that in the core area, is it in premium A and B,
Perfect.
and
That would
things
be a
like
great
that.
start. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. And I apologize, this is actually an operating question, but I missed it. So I was reading through the operating budget section, trying to figure out what exactly the ridership numbers are and what they've done. It looks like on page 24 of your section, there's a place where it says percent change in people mover productivity, which is riders per timetable revenue hour.
Mhm.
So I think that's the best measure you have in here. That I could find at least. So in 2017, we went to a ridership model. How has it worked? Has our ridership increased? And is it because we've increased the number of riders or we've reduced the number of hours?
So we are definitely increasing riders. We have done 2 service changes since we did the system overhaul. And with each, I like to look at it in a way where with the legacy system, we were shaving fractions of seconds and making the adjustments, teeny tiny. Now with the new system, we are making leaps and bounds every time we do a service change. We're getting more efficient every single time. So this last one that we did in July, we were able to extend Route 65 in South Anchorage to the airport. So we now have 2 routes that go to the airport. Route 55 was extended into ANMC, and its frequency was increased from 60 minutes to 30 minutes. So, we are adding additional trips, weekday trips on the 91. Service on Sundays was expanded till 8 p.m., and we made an adjustment to the Route 40 ending service at midnight now instead of 2:30. So within our existing budgets, or our budget, we were able to gain all of these additional efficiencies and actually provide some more service on the street. So we are seeing, I have a chart, and I'll, when we do our little learning session, I'll make sure to dive into the ridership more. But ridership is increasing. It has increased month after month in 2019. And Sundays, August 2019 was our highest ridership ever in the history of the system. And that was, Sunday's ridership was 4,818 riders on Sundays. So.
Can you give me a really basic number? How much has ridership increased in the last 2 years?
Last 2 years? Let's see here. I have that number here.
sorry.
We'll find it.
Yeah,
too.
I'll send it
Yeah,
out.
we'll send it to you.
Thank you. And I guess before I get to you, Mr. Concept, dovetailing on that, is there an updated report card on the website?
Not yet. We are getting ready to start kicking that project off, and it'll be ready by January.
Okay, cool. If you haven't read it yet, I read the first report card, which I think was after the first...
Last October.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, now we're trying to get on an annual, January to December.
Thank you. Mr. Concept.
Yeah, thank you. Two things. First, I just want to say thank you to you and your team, because this service is one of the critical links in our social service and lower economic status and homelessness systems that's often overlooked. You're the bridge for people being able to get where they need to go from where they are. And I don't know, maybe I missed you discussing this, but I'm hopeful because I want to make sure that everyone on this body sees this as a tool in their neighborhood, that we are contemplating how to bring service again to South Anchorage and Eagle River, because I think we miss the mark when we don't provide an opportunity for our entire municipality to participate in the benefit of the system.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So the next we have traffic department. Stephanie is simple and elegant. No complications. It's just traffic. She's the only department that has 50,000 employees with only 27 that are paid, because the rest of them have a steering wheel. So in the traffic department, 300,000, but they don't all drive, but maybe something to do with it. So inside traffic operations, I think Stephanie, pretty much a continuation budget. She did make one adjustment in 2019 where she moved some non-labor to some labor that allowed to give her a senior electronic technician that she needed. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was at Signals. And so, doing the things that inside the signal management system inside Stephanie's world. So we made that change, and with that, we carried that over to a full-time continuation. We reduced her non-labor, we moved the money permanently into her labor, and that's how we're going to move on. Other than that, don't have any other additions, changes, or suggestions to Stephanie's department, at least on the operating side. I think she runs a pretty lean ship.
See any operating questions? Oh, Mr. Weddleton. Are we on capital or on
Operating.
We're on operating.
Yeah, but now we're on capital.
Actually, Ms. LaFredo, and then, yeah, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on the operating side for traffic studies. As far as funding levels, I assume then you're adequately funded to keep up with the demand. And where are you at with the traffic studies in terms of how many you can do each year and are funded, and if there's any upward pressure from those requests?
Are you talking specifically for traffic calming studies or just traffic studies in general?
I guess, yeah, probably more traffic calming, because those are the ones we hear about through community councils.
Yeah. As far as the data collection team goes, which is primarily where the funding is needed, we are pretty steady. When the traffic calming program was suspended for a few years, when it came back online, we had a couple summers of very intense data needs and following up with that, but it's leveled off. And so I think the demand for data collection as it relates to the traffic calming requests is pretty stable, and I think we're okay with the funding levels related to that. As far as continuing analysis and other requests, sometimes because it's the safety team that will then follow up and do the analysis, and if we take it further, that team is a little bit smaller. So there is limitations there.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance's question was exactly my question, but I will add a second one. And that is, so do you keep some kind of a running list that we would have access to find out which areas, which streets are under some kind of traffic calming study status?
I have a running list definitely of where they have been conducted. I would have to check with my staff if we have ones that are upcoming.
What's the easiest way for us to find out?
Well, we have a list posted on our website, and we mail it out on an annual basis that all of you and all of the legislators, and I feel like the entire world is CC'd on it, where we say, because it's huge, of the streets that have been studied, those that actually, that were studied that did not have an identified speeding problem, and then those that did have an identified speeding problem, and then kind of ranking those of order of priority based on things such as volumes, whether or not there's school zones and parks in the area and things like that.
And that, like I said, that's updated annually. It is available on our website, and it does get mailed out, but I can redistribute it to the group if necessary.
All of Tony.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And have you heard anything back from the fire department about the experiment with the new speed humps that fit so they can drive over those faster with their trucks?
So I have to reach out to the fire department to hear their feedback on it and whether they've had any issues with it. What we have received feedback on is we actually just concluded our follow-up studies on how effective they were, because when they first got installed, we had a lot of communities and a lot of people who were directly adjacent to them saying, well, these are going to be completely pointless. They have gaps in them. People are going to be able to drive around it and not do anything. And thus far, our after studies have actually showed that they have been successful in reducing speeds, because if you try to shoot the gap, you have to slow down. So it actually, they have been successful. So we will be reaching out to the fire department and having follow-up conversations with them, because our intent is to try to install them in locations where we have been kind of stalled on installing speed humps if we're able to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, I don't have any more. Sorry. All right, Mr. Reynolds.
But you brought one up on those speed humps. You know, when you have that gap, if you have all the cool motorcycles are really low, and I bottom out on those typical ones sometimes. So the gaps are really important. Otherwise, we've got to go way around the corner. But
take it at an angle, John.
What's that?
Take it at an angle.
I just want to push. You have Lore Road, 300,000 for traffic calming there. It's quite high, given that everywhere else gets $500,000. And my guess is because of great traffic improvements by putting a tunnel under the Seward Highway, we've created a tragedy on Lore Road, and now we have to fix what the state's imposed on us. Would that be right?
So the $300,000 is actually to conduct studies and to make recommendations to work towards design and construction, because Lore Road has actually been on the list for a long time, prior to the connection of 76th Avenue and the interchange that is now there. And it continues to be a concern. We have parks there that are now dog parks, and we've seen an increase in activity. And we have significant concerns about it, and we've heard from the community they have significant concerns. And it's bigger than what we can handle in-house. So that's why there is a specific request for that street, because it is a bigger community issue, especially now that it is related to interchange.
Thanks. Did you want to talk about capital?
Yeah, you guys done with operating, or you want to look at that?
Yeah, we're done with operating. Okay.
One quick implication that Mr. Wellington didn't overtly state was that that project is very similar to the project on the other side of Diamond, which is the Vanguard Academy Road. And so if there's a problem that's been created, then that definitely pushes forward the question of maybe we need to look more closely. I think that was the implication that was unstated. You don't have
need to state that, apparently.
I don't want to make sure everyone heard it, those who aren't.
Thank you. All right, now we can do that.
So on the capital side, Stephanie has an ongoing program where she updates, maintains, makes changes to the signage and signals. As many of you are familiar with, in addition to the bond funds, the traffic department gets inside the revenue side of the world, they get about $2 million a year from the state to manage 70% of the signals in Anchorage, which are owned by the state and state rights of way, but she manages that for them. She is their contractor. So inside Lore Road, we talked about this is a design hit. There will be construction hits in the outer year. And then traffic calming and safety improvements. This is an ongoing program. She's got a lot of money, has had a lot of money in traffic calming. She has spent that down, spent and made those improvements. So this is the piece here. I think if I can, I'm just going to go back to Mr. Dunbar's question about the safe routes to schools that Stephanie manages and how they do that. And the question he had was, if we have money in the out years, if we moved it up, what would we build next year?
Yeah, and so related to the school zone safety money, we were getting $500,000 for a number of years. And to be fair, there's a backlog of money that we are working towards finding and doing improvements specifically to school zone signage to make sure that we are moving towards compliance with MUTCD requirements. So there have been changes with that. But if you were to gift me with $4 million next year, to be fair, I do not have specific projects where I could just spend that things lined up, shelf ready, to be able to do so. In my 8.5 years here at the municipality, our relationship with the school district has been very spotty ever since one of the there used to be a very dedicated transportation coordinator at the English School District, and when he retired, there have now been 4 different people in that position that have lasted a year and a half at most, and then there's been big gaps in between, and our coordination with the school district on safe routes to school has been spotty. The Safe Routes to School Committee has come back to life and is meeting on a monthly basis, and my goal is to work more hand in hand with them to be able to identify bigger projects that we could use funds to make more improvements related to the safe routes to school, not just the school zones themselves.
Go ahead, Mr. Delvers.
Yeah, a related question. I know that Tudor Muldoon is a state road,
yes.
But is there anything we could do with whether it's the signage or the Safe Routes to School program to make particularly the Baxter-Tudor intersection safer? We've had this conversation before, but it's extreme. People slide in that intersection all the time. We just had a fatality there of one of those students from Benny Benson High School. So is there anything you could do, whether in this capital budget or through some other means, even without this, hopefully the state would cooperate, but even without the state's cooperation, is there anything you could do?
Other than changes to signage and perhaps minor modifications to signal timings to manage it, no, not really.
So signage, for example, it's not a marked school zone because it's a charter school and it's a little bit too far off the road. Can we, work with the school district, put in signage there? Or can the DOT say, no, you can't do that because it is their road?
We could work with the school district, and actually we do have the ability to sign for school zones in state right-of-way. In fact, they have delegated that authority to us, so we get to actually operate and maintain all school zone signage. They still get to review and comment and make sure that they agree with the placement of it within their right-of-way, but it actually is our responsibility to do it.
And then, so 2 quick follow-ups to that. Can you do a blinking light even if it doesn't drop the speed? Can you do a blinking light on your end without the state's cooperation? And then 2, this is something actually Mr. Schutte pointed out to me. The button to do the crosswalk is on the side. It's on the western side of the post, and so the person standing there isn't necessarily visible to the people coming down to the road. Can you do something as simple as put that walk button on the other side of the pole so that people can see the cars and the cars can see them as they're coming down to the road?
That may seem like a simple fix, but we have to consider ADA. So those push buttons have to be within a certain distance, both height and reach of somebody that could possibly be in a wheelchair. So we have to look at what the corner looks like, and there could be it likely would not be as simple as moving just a push button. I mean, it would be something that could be looked at, but it gets really complicated fast. And as far as reduced speed school zones go, that is a bigger overall conversation because typically reduced speed school zones are for schools that have walking zones, and specifically, and this does not have a defined walking district, and when it comes to the school district, more than likely they would actually say that Tudor Road you are not allowed to cross. They would be requiring busing, or they would have a school crossing guard out there. So there are actual policies from the school district that we would have issues with. And not to mention, then it adds to ongoing maintenance and operations period.
So, all right, I don't want to monopolize the time. I'll just say, I would like, if possible, before we get into the actual approval and amendment to this capital program and the bond, I would like from you, how much would it cost to make some kind of improvement to that intersection? Whatever you recommend that we do. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sabatel.
Yes, thank you. On the Lower Road, we have a very interested community council on this one. It actually says the project's been designed by traffic engineering. PM&E will manage it and will allow for 2020 construction start. So that's a little bit different than what I was just hearing.
You're exactly right, because that is one of 2 projects into the description that we thought it was originally going to be construction, and it's not. So the updated stuff that I gave to you earlier, the revised text in the handout, we have to make that adjustment in there. It was found out probably last week in planning and zoning. So That, and the other one that was a slight adjustment with Boundary, we're still going to do a repaving, we're just not going to redo the entire street.
So when our constituents ask at next week's community council meeting, it will be $300,000 for design,
Yep.
and then it'll have to go into the next year's bond to actually get construction funds?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question on the $2 million from the state to manage the signals. Is that increased each year to reflect inflation? And just a little bit concerned about it because when the state cuts its budget, it generally means reduced services here. So wondering how stable that is.
So it does get increased both on if there's any signals that are actually added, if there's any school zones that are added in their rights of way that they agree to, if there are flashers, beacon intersections. There are agreed upon dollar values that if those get increased, that we get increased funding, and it is we get a CPI adjustment on an annual basis. So it is a separate line item on the overall state budget. When you look at it, they have a specific line item for that, and I was watching it very closely. Central Region often says, that if it does not get funded by the legislature, then they don't have a way to fund that internally, but we have a very clear agreement that says that they pay us that money, otherwise the contract will be null and void, and they'd have to find a way to fund it otherwise. So I tell them that's why it's your job to educate the legislature to what that money does and the importance of that money. And to date, it has been safe.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we're about an hour behind. So what I would like to do is we have some time next week to finish the departments. What I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and try to get through Parks and Rec, but let planning, real estate development services, the library, the CFO, finance, and purchasing go, because I just don't think that we're going to get to them because we have in front of us Maury at Public Works Administration. I don't think it's going to long. Natasha at Health, Human Resources, and Municipal Manager, then Chris, and if we have time, do Parks and Rec since they're in the building, but pretty much everyone else is at a different location. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to let them go, let you go at 3, and then we'll put those in that order starting next week.
Yeah, that's
okay
fair.
with you.
And yeah, we're not leaving at 3. We have another works.
Well, I'm leaving at 3, so I just want to let you know that. So would that be okay with you? I think let's just plan on that, and I'll let these guys go. So if you are, so Ron, Tiffany, Rob, Mary Jo, thank you for sticking around. Alex, if you want to stick around for the party, you're welcome. Finance, and then you guys can take off. We'll catch up with you next week. Okay? So next, we have...
I like to party.
Thank you.
After 2 hours, it has to be covered. So, Maury, let's keep us going, buddy. Help me keep control of this organization. So next is Public Works Admin. Maury Robinson in charge of Public Works Admin. So basically, Maury's his job is to help administer, not only keep the administrative side of Alan Chakowski, PM&E, and maintenance and operations, but also you'll see that while he's got 17 people, basically, I think, I can't remember, like 10 million or probably 9 million of that 11.7 million is money from service areas. So Maury also manages the service areas and helping them if they have contract needs, and it helps those sort of manage their resources that they assess themselves for. So that's really the bulk of Maury's budget. He does have a little bit of salary adjustments, and like every department we've had, based on the changes in our status for the fleet, we're going to propose, we got some slight fleet adjustments. We've been talking to the Assembly about changing on how we support our 1% for art. And so that project, with the resources there, to sort of had $50,000 that we would add into the budget. The curator, Gideon, is inside Maury's shop. And then we have some adjustments to interloan funds. Maury may have to help me on that one. I can't recall what that was about. But pretty simple. I guess the one key change is that our direction to really try to start maintaining those almost 500 pieces of artwork that we have not had a set-aside program for maintenance. So with that, and he does not have a capital program. He just helps everybody manage theirs.
Okay. Any questions? Sure, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, since it's been several years since we've been getting much capital money from the state legislature, have any of the service areas voted to increase their taxes to keep and maintain the roads in their areas?
No, not recently. They've been accumulating fund balance over the last few years, so folks are now going to have to use their local funds to do the improvements and major repairs.
Okay, I just wondered, because that's something that may eventually come down the road when those savings are used up.
Yeah, it's definitely going to put pressure over time. Like I said, a number of them, they can do their basic maintenance. I think most of them, their mill rates probably just slightly inflated just to have some emergency and major repair funds. But construction, one project, you could burn up your balance pretty quickly. Yeah, so it's going to have an impact.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Webb.
I was going to say they may not be increasing their mill rate, but moving closer to their maximum. I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
So,
I think all but 3 are at their, well, including Eagle Rivers. We have 4 who are just slightly under their stated limit. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Okay, the health department. In Ms. Pineda's world, we have had a lot of conversations about this, and I know we're going to have more conversations, but this is a high-level overview of what's going on. So we mentioned this earlier, but in 2019, we had a one-time hit of money for housing and homelessness, as it's a contribution to that project that was providing some matching funds. So, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that was also to be helpful in the mobile intervention team. So that was a $500,000 one-time hit. And then in the first quarter, we added another $185,000 that they used to support some of their initiatives as it relates to camp cleanup and overflow shelter primarily. The $32,000 in bonds, I must be from a long time ago. I can't think of a capital project. I can't remember what that one was exactly for. I don't recall right off the top of my head. On the changes that she's got for salaries and benefits, about $11,000, and then animal control contracts. So she has a animal control care contract that has an escalator next year. So we built that escalation into the contractual requirement that they have. And then they had a request in for some work on a environmental database that they're required to keep in place. They needed some software, so we added that in for them. And so that will be part of their continuation budget. The additions that we put in, and we've talked about these. The first one, the Homeless and Behavioral Health Systems Coordinator, we had some discussions earlier this week about if that's the position that's going to be done or if it's going to have a different duty or assignment, and we're working on that for you. But right now the money is for a half-year position for that duty. For housing and homeless, a contribution for ongoing project. For the mobile intervention team, this is $550,000. Last year it was $500,000. We upped it a little bit because we wanted to add some additional support for some staffing. We are working on the breakdown of that. For labor and non-labor, we've got 3 positions, I think, and then maybe some contractual services. So probably 3 or 4 positions are supporting that, and then they have some other non-labor. Again, we're breaking that down for you. We will prepare that, finish that response for you. And then the last one, the last couple is $250,000. The intention, at least at this time, is it's going to be used for supporting shelters. At the time we prepared this budget, the idea was that we would be using that as leverage to a portion of the $40 million that the nonprofits would be providing some level of money to the municipality. We do not know how much it's going to be or how much the match. So we put that $250 in there. And again, we were looking at something in Midtown or in that area, but it might be something different in the end. And then some to fund a position in women, infants, and children in the WIC program. And this will be a position that is supported inside the operating budget. It had been supported at times through a grant but they're really trying to stretch out the grant resources in that program, and by doing so, they have recommending that we add a position inside the operating to help keep that program supported. So on the operating side of the world, I know that we talked about it yesterday, and we have some special times to talk about it even more, particularly as it relates to the things that we're adding. So if you have some general comments about that or some questions that you have that we need to answer when we get back together, if we're still having that meeting, that would be helpful for us. And I think that's probably the big thing on the health department. The one thing that I will say on the capital side is that while we're still working for the relocation and moving of the health department to a different facility, there's a lot of things in play there. So the timing for adding bond money to support that project that we could actually deliver in a calendar year in 2020, when we built the capital budget, it didn't look like that was going to happen, so we took it out. But you will see it in the CIP in 2021 for capital improvements on that. It's just the pieces that we're working with to get them moved or relocated. The timing which we originally thought is not going to happen. So it's still in the plan, just not at the same time on the capital side. So.
Thank you. A couple questions for you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given that we've heard the health department described as the third leg of the public safety stool, I would have questions along the same lines as what we had for police and fire, like what is the right size for our community in terms of services? I noticed on here that services have been cut, like for animal care and control. So my question to Ms. Pineda would be, have any of your obligations towards public safety and health gone away? If not, what are those? And have you inherited any new obligations? And if so, where are they coming from, and what are those, and what kind of pressure does that put on your staff?
So I'll sort of broadly answer that, and most likely I'll come back to Deanne Petco, who's our deputy director and a 20-plus year employee and leader at the health department. Is always best to articulate those answers, and just because of the timing, and she had an interview scheduled, we weren't able to have her here. So I'm happy to talk to that. I do know that we've looked at like 10-year look-backs, and over time what's happened is as things go away or funds have been removed, we are not always removing the obligation, but we're removing the resources to pay for that. So she has a pretty great detailed list of what some of those things are, and we can share it with you. But I can't tell you exactly what the right size for we're a mid-sized city health department, and we don't have a lot of services that many other mid-sized communities have. Some of that's contributed to the fact that we don't have a county system, and the state doesn't distribute funds to us in the same way that they do in other states. So we've briefly looked at that, but I haven't had time to dig into it with there's a national association of counties and health officials that kind of help you map out what your size, what services you should have in your city. We have not done that yet.
And my follow-up to that would be, is there any legislation that has passed at the local level here or anything like we've done on the assembly side that has contributed to your workload?
Yes, I'm pretty positive that is true. And I can't answer it exactly right this moment. But I can come back to you guys with a list of those things.
For the record, the mayor said a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
I think Ms. Prowse wanted to
Through the chair to Ms. LaFrance, I will be much less diplomatic than Ms. Pineda is and say that the answer is yes. Both the legislative changes, either through budget cuts at the state level and legislative changes at the local level with the assembly, and ordinances that are passed through our body here, add additional workload to the health department and do not usually come with funded positions. I think there's a bit of a misconception that when you pass an additional code enforcement requirement on the health department, or some sort of educational process that needs to be done, or any additional changes to our existing code that does not analyze the breakdown of staffing available to perform that work, it's automatically being pushed down. So the expectation, and we can go through a list of them if we want to start from how long I've been here, with all the assembly ordinances that have gone through that in particular have targeted the health department. I'm not suggesting that the legislation is bad, in fact it's very good. But usually things like a plastic bag ban, or mold inspections, or healthcare transparency, or what?
Tobacco 21.
Tobacco 20, all of these things are changes in ordinance and additional regulation that did not come with additional staffing. So I think that Director Pineda has offered Cs along with a couple of the ordinances that have moved in the last few months. Just because the C exists doesn't mean the position has been funded. It has to be followed with an appropriating document that then funds the position, creates the position, and allows the work to be done at the health department level. I think that Ms. Pineda is doing a lot of work that is not technically director work. Because there is no one within the subset of employees in the health department who have the time or capabilities to do these kinds of things. I think that we can probably go through and make a list of all of the things that have changed. In particular, as she said, the cuts that have occurred with the health department over the last 10 years have taken them down to bare bones, and we have done our best over the last few years to add in where absolutely necessary for functionality, retention of employees, and actual service to the community, what we could find that needed to go into the health department. And in the balance of all of the departments that we have to represent and fund, what can we put here that isn't going to take away from public safety and add to what the health department can do? So there is a much larger conversation that can occur. But I would suggest that the health department is drastically underfunded for its position count and the work that it is required to do on an ordinance level and a service to the community level, but also now that the state funding is disappearing from behavioral health and health services around our community and the entire state, the pressure on the Anchorage Health Department is increasing every single day.
Yeah, whatever. What she said.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I'm just trying to scan this. Maybe I'm missing it somewhere.
The funding.
Yeah.
Just don't see it in there.
Yeah, and so I was looking for the line where we might find, at least in 2019, where we funded, $800,000+ of emergency shelter, and what the expectation is going forward for the next year, where we would see that in here, or if that's a crisis conversation we're going to have to return to in July. And then on page HD 16, so it's two questions. And this is where I put my Aquila hat on for a minute. In your bottom section there, the planning and design for Alaska Center for Treatment, it still references Clitheroe Center, which could look to future bodies as a sanction of a current provider for future bidding opportunities. So I would again recommend removing any name of an operator for a municipal facility from that line item. It just,
It's a geographical reference.
It kind of is, but it's also the name of a nonprofit operator that's providing services for the municipality. So, but the red meat question is, where's the 800,000 or whatever that number exactly is, or do we look forward to that coming?
That's needed for
overflow, cold weather, winter, keeping people from dying in the streets.
So it's represented in last year's funds partially in that $685,000, a portion of that. So if you look at the 2019 revised budget and where it says one-time requirement, that 150 of that to shelter.
What page?
Oh, sorry, HD5.
Through the chair to Mr. Constant, I believe I understand your question, and the answer to it is it's not in there.
Okay, thank you.
What Natasha is referring to is the rollout of the one-time costs that were included in the 2019 budget, which was the $685 if you include the additional $185 for sheltering and the mobile intervention team. Those were one-time costs in the 2019 budget. A handful of these things are being put into the 2020 budget as operating costs so that they carry forward. The sheltering conversation, particular to the 800,000 that you're referring to, and I'm assuming this is the Brother Francis contract that was enacted in July and the Beans contract most recently enacted, correct? The Brother Francis contract is not dealt with in this budget. We believe that that is a conversation that this assembly needs to have during first quarter budget revisions. The contract expires in July 1 of 2020. First quarter budget revisions are in April. We go through our final year-end balance. We know what the legislature is doing. The philanthropy and private capital conversation has moved a little further forward. We fully acknowledge that that is not something that is accommodated in this budget, but it needs a larger conversation with this body and the entire community to understand where we're going to go with all of these different levers that are being pulled. For the Beans contract in particular, the contract that the Assembly has approved is fully covered as far as we can tell with the funds that exist in our 2019 budget and the money that will be available in the 2020 budget. It's through a combination of personnel vacancies and some other leftover funds in some specific pockets that are able to move around but don't historically exist there. That's what we said in July, was that we were going to be able to accommodate this measure of contracts by funding this and then saving money here and pushing it over there. But the Beans Cafe contract is funded through April of 2020 in a combination of 19 and the current proposed 20. But there is also no funding currently available for the October overflow that will be necessary in 2020. There's a line item in here that refers to sheltering either in Midtown or with the Stolt building, and that was put in as a sort of safety net to either accommodate the overflow contract that we know is traditionally needed October forward, or to fund and match the private contributions that will go towards a different building in some jurisdiction that we have not had the opportunity to bring to this body and have the conversation about. It's not far enough along. All of these things have to continue moving before we're able to have a really deep conversation about it and make the determination as to how those funds should be spent. So we think that that conversation is appropriate for 1Q.
Just thank you. The only note I would add is the conjunction is and, not or, in the budget between the Stolt building and the Midtown. But that's a good description, and I just wanted to make sure that's on the table, that that's a conversation we're going to have to come back to at some time in the future outside of our budgeting process.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
I'll pass, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. What's turnover like?
Our turnover has been high this year. We have lots of new leadership, and we've had some retirements. We have more retirements coming. We have more planned retirements coming in next year as well.
Yeah, so the history of my interest is that people generally in the people business, high stress, dealing with lots of tough situations, idealistic people that want to make a difference, and so turnover's
low
up.
pay.
And low, yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry?
I just said don't forget low pay.
Well, that's where I was going.
Oh.
And any good management, one of the tools is what's turnover. When you have a vacancy, how long is the line of people standing outside the door? So because these human services get real close to where people live, I think we ought to, we in the administration ought to figure out what it takes in terms of pay, benefits, and job satisfaction, so you're not dealing with that. Because the break-in training period, sorting period is significant. So I, for one, will only be here for a whole few months, hopefully. Glad to help on that.
Well, let's hurry up.
Yeah.
On that is why we have the WIC ask is in. Part of the WIC request that's associated with trying to level out some pay grades for some employees based on turnover. But we can take more back.
Between you and us, administration, we have a responsibility to help deliver you from that problem. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions.
Just
Thank
one
you.
comment on the health department. They have one of the most complex finance budgeting systems that they work with from a variety of different sources for a lot of different programs, and they do a hell of a job managing it. So my compliments to Natasha and the team. It's between that and the grants, it's
So you're going to have bonuses
it's
following?
a hell of a lot of work.
I'll take bonuses. I'm happy to support that.
Where do you live?
So,
No bonus pat on the head.
This is what it
thank you, Natasha.
Your arms in the air.
Thanks for patting on the head. Okay, so we are down to the last 15 minutes. Cheryl, come on up. We're going to talk about human resources. So the HR department here has too been making some changes over the last 6 to 12 months, changes in leadership, changes in duties, and so in the budget process here, so in Ms. Evans' world, they have a continuation budget, salaries from 2019 to 2020, the changes that they've made and just the salary adjustments, partly because of the new people coming on are a little bit less expensive, and just the changes that are made. There's a slight reduction in the total amount of the continuation budget and salaries for them. The payroll auditors that Mr. Falsey had mentioned, those would be 3 additional positions that we will add into the budget. They're funded for a half a year. That's so basically that $165,000 is divided by 3 for half a year for those positions. The first half of the year, we're planning that they will continue to be working on the work for ML&P. Obviously, if the work for ML&P is becoming more expeditious and they're getting the payroll audits done quicker, and as we look into the first quarter, if they're done or getting close to that closure and they're ready to start something that's not ML&P, then we'll make some adjustments there so that they can do, they don't have to wait till July to start the audit process. They can just, when they're done with that, they can roll on, or if we only have one that's needed for ML&P and the other 2 can start with IBEW or Teamsters or whoever else the next piece would be, they would just move on forward. So there are requests there. And I think Miss Evans and similar to Natasha and to Miss Acton, and a lot of requests came in for support. I think HR is one of the key departments, not only of purchasing, that basically their ability to succeed in hiring and training and dealing with labor negotiations and everything that goes on in her world. A lot of priorities in payroll and classification and employment, and so they too had a lot of needs that we will not be able to satisfy, and so we know that as well. And I think sort of new on the job while the honeymoon's over after 14 days for all of us. She and her team are doing a great job down in HR. Really looking forward to it, and I think, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but the hiring of the payroll auditors, they're going to be out. They just cleared our system for financing and we can be advertising to get them started. So I think that's all I have for human resources. And I have some questions for Ms. Evans.
I have some questions. Ms. LaPrince.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, to Ms. Evans, what are the needs that the budget is unable to satisfy?
Well, the payroll auditors are brought on to help us with the payroll corrections that we have been encountering since go live. We have a fairly substantial daily diet of SAP challenges. I'm not sure if that money, what that would look like. Beyond that, I think because of the amount of time we spend focused on that, we are not truly allowed to do some of the other things that we are actually hired to do. I mean, we can do it, it's just in a lesser and less expeditious manner. But I mean, overall, I think given what we have for budget and what we have in front of us, we'll be fine. We were able to add 2 more folks to our classification team, which has proven to be a bit of a pinch point, and so we have that team fully, all the chairs are filled there, and so we're just getting everybody up to speed. Beyond that, I don't really know.
Thank you. And Mr. Dunbar, were you in the queue?
Yeah, but it's fine.
Okay.
Can I ask
Yeah, let's go David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry if you mentioned this, but why starting mid-year?
for the payroll people?
Their first priority is going to be MLMP. And so we're going to use,
First priority.
pardon me? They're going to be doing the audit of MLMP, so the IBW inside of MLMP. So they're going to start right now, and it's going to, we anticipate that we'll
So
move through the
MLMP is
beginning.
funding them until mid-year. Okay,
Correct,
thanks.
correct.
Don't see any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next one is Mr. Falsey in the Municipal Manager's Office, also another simple and elegant department, but has a lot of resources that are related to our workman's comp, our general liability, which is the significant portion of that $13 million that you have inside. So inside the Municipal Manager, as a reminder, he has risk management, is the Office of Emergency Management and the Office of Equal Opportunity. So all of those, and the Transportation Inspector. So all of those departments are under the Municipal Manager. So they all are inside his budget. Last year we had a one-time hit of money for an affirmative action plan for contractual services. We don't know the status of it, but we took that piece away. That was to help some folks down in Heather McAlpine's shop. And so general obligation bonds for those services that would be inside Bill's shop, any obligation bonds related to that, small adjustments in salaries, and then a fleet adjustment. I think it's mostly outside. Bill doesn't have a car. He has a beautiful treadmill in his office. It's amazing. And so no maintenance on that. And so other than that, I think Bill's shop is primarily non-labor. That's where all the changes and the things that we see are effectuated there. We don't have any other one-time ads inside Bill's under the Municipal Manager's Department. Pretty simple.
We're on hard questions for Bill. There, what
So we don't always increase department's costs. We significantly decrease them when we did the taxi changes. Did you, what do we have left of that department?
We didn't do that.
The taxi department is now the Transportation Inspection Office. We have a transportation inspector who is not full-time. She's about 3/4 time. She has one code enforcement officer. We actually had a little bit of difficulty settling that position down, but it's two of them, and they seem to be getting the job done.
Thank you. Ms. Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do not have a deputy municipal manager position, correct?
That is correct, and before we are all said and done, it's probably a mistake to leave it that way. But for now, we're muddling through.
Most cities have one, I think, of our size.
I would expect so, and we used to have one. That position, while we have been around, has always been repurposed or now eliminated. So originally, it was Alden Thurns. Alden Thurn occupied that personnel control number to be in charge of the SAP project. When the SAP project wrapped up, we no longer had, when we were making the cuts, we cut the deputy municipal manager position to make the budget work in previous years. It does create kind of a single point of failure in some ways, and it's probably not optimal, but for now, I'd say that's the way we have been living for the past few years. We'll probably continue to live that way next year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. All right. I think the last one we're going to be able to get to is Mr. Schutte in the Office of Economic and Community Development. And so in Chris's world, similar to Mr. Falsey's world, he has a significant amount of his budget. We're not paying 6 people $12 million, but what we are doing is we spend, I think, about $9 million of that, if I'm not mistaken, in our contractual obligations for the museum, the Denina, and other contracts that they have to manage. So it's pretty much all non-labor. I don't think there's any significant change. I'll just point out a highlight here at the bottom. We do know, at least we're projecting, that there will be a contractual increase that we'll need to oblige for the George Sullivan Arena. And we expect that they'll have a net operating deficit, and so we need to fill that in 2020, and then additional direct costs as it relates to the hotel motel tax. And then on the continuation side, the I-Team, which is Brendan Babb and his team, they've been doing a lot of work Originally brought on with the Bloomberg grant, been doing a lot of help with a lot of departments in the municipality, and with the health department, with GIS, and with some nonprofits, and most recently helping with property appraisal, and as they move forward with assessments. I think last year or the year before that, one of their most successful projects that I think was very helpful is they helped the Treasury Department in recuperating from the delinquents tax bills, and they came up with an elegant, sort of polite way to say you owe us money, and we're very successful in that, modeled after places that have been done in the past. And so we want to keep those resources on board. The grant money from the Bloomberg Foundation and their support will be going away. They have a lot of work that they're going to continue to do for us, not only for property appraisal, but for other folks. So that would be the funding for those two positions mid-year. And then we know that there'll be some GIS licensing costs that will be funded from ABLU, through IGC through ABLU. So that $100,000 will be there, but you'll see $100,000 coming from ABLU to support that. It's not tax money, it's coming from ratepayer money, as it were, from that. So I asked Brenda to just be prepared, because I know if you had questions about what they do, I think Assemblymember Constant asked, can you tell us what these guys do besides amazing work? And so I did not do it justice, but Chris can probably jump in, or Mr. Babb can jump in if you have any questions about that. And then Chris can give you a rundown on the non-labor piece that I didn't go into detail on. That's all I have.
It wasn't so much what do they do, but can we get a report on what they've done?
Yes, absolutely.
I wasn't questioning. I was more like, hey.
My choice of words. Those are exact choice of words. He said, can I get a report on what they do?
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two quick questions. So, and I apologize if you said this and I just missed it. So, in 2020, we're going to supplement the funding from Bloomberg. Is there any thoughts about 2021? Is this team going away, or are we planning on?
No, actually, through the chair, hopefully the exact opposite. So, Mr. Wilbur did a good job of highlighting some of the cost savings that have resulted from efforts in the I-Team work portfolio. And so, for example, while the grant funds, the external grant funds, will be depleted midway through the year next year, we recognize that that the taxpayer funded portion that we're asking you to pick up actually will be realized through savings that we generate primarily in the property appraisal department, looking through, doing their exercise on the property tax exemption claimants and whether or not they are fraudulent or not.
Great. So, I mean, basically what you're saying is that this will become a self-sustaining team that will be raising revenue from the city and will be paying their salaries and then probably considerably more through those revenues.
Through the chair, that's absolutely right. The whole operating premise of an I-Team is that you find efficiencies or ways to do business for less money, and that is how they generate their revenue, if you will.
And then my second question is about the contractual increase for the Sullivan Sports Arena. Is that that's an increase? Is there another expenditure that we're not seeing here that's sort of baked in? So, are they $239,000 in the red, or are they more than that? And that's just the increase from last year.
Through the chair, so I believe the way it's reflected here is that this is above and beyond what we anticipated in previous years. And so earlier you saw the capital side, and there's a lot of capital projects that hit our capital fund for that building. This reflects the operating side of the building, which sometimes does include maintenance, right? So it's not major capital expenditures, it's minor maintenance that falls under the contractual obligations that SMG has. Short version of the story is, I think most of you are familiar with, they operate our facilities on our behalf. At the end of the year, they basically front all the money themselves to run it. At the end of the year, if revenues do not equal what they spent on costs, then we are obligated to help make them whole. The Sullivan Arena has, and the ice rinks, have operated at a loss for several years, and as part of our contractual obligation, we not only are asking them to cut costs, they've severely reduced the size of their workforce, they've also gone out to recruit new types of events, et cetera, to fill that hole, but we still are obligated to make them whole at the end of the year.
So can I re-ask that question in a slightly different way? How much did it cost for us to make them whole in 2019, And, or I guess that's what this is. This is 2019, not 2020.
Yeah.
So how much in 2019 and how much do we anticipate in 2020 to make them all?
So 20, Lance says in 2019.
I don't know how much it was.
Okay,
We can find out.
We can find out. It was roughly similar.
The same amount.
Yeah,
Roughly the same amount.
it was roughly similar.
And that's the number, or it's more than that, right?
So it was a 230 or whatever it is,
Okay.
239.
For some reason, I remember us giving like 400,000. Maybe I'm misremembering that at
So,
one point.
so that was, I believe that was an appropriation from 3 years ago,
Okay.
or was it 2 or 3 years ago?
Okay. So they're losing money, but they're losing less money than they used to. Is that a fair way to say it?
Well, we're currently reviewing the 2018 audit, and my preliminary read of it is that 2018 was not kind to them. So that it may end up being that the 2018 net operating loss was greater than the 2017 net operating loss. But generally speaking, yes, they are moving the opposite direction.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Plus we lost the Seawolves, they would be playing on the Southern.
Through the chair, that's correct. We lost the Seawolves last year, and they had to scramble to rethink, what to do with larger vehicles.
Thank you. Ms. Salvatore.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constable.
So I know this is a little bit outside of development services, or excuse me, OECD, it's development services. I was looking for code enforcement and where they fit into this. I don't see them listed as a job line under Bob's department. And so, but I know they're under yours. Do they fit under development services?
Correct.
And so what are the job titles for code enforcement officers?
We can provide that for you offline if you'd like.
Thank you. One last question. Under the breakdown for the $9 million for contractual and other services, I think that's the line. Do you have detail for that, or is it somewhere that I can find?
Yes. Also, we can provide that for you offline. Yeah, it's broken up, as you can imagine, it's broken up between the Alaska Center for the Performing Arts, the Anchorage Museum, the Rasmussen Center, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I can kind of get a sense.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Chairman, it's a little after 3. I think we'll pick up next week with Parks and Recreation. And if you guys, we've been writing all your questions down. We will, those that weren't answered, we'll work with Desiree to make sure we capture them all. We'll get a response to you as soon as we possibly can. Hopefully, most of them between your next meeting, and then we'll wrap them up from there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks.